That's it. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this remote meeting of the South and West Plans Panel. My name is Councillor Caroline Gruen, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. The South and West Plans Panel deals with the applications from the south, northwest, and west of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public, and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. And I'd like to start the meeting today by confirming that this meeting of the South and West Plans Panel meets the requirements of the Council's constitution, even though members of the panel are in remote attendance. While items today will be fully discussed as is usual, remote attendance requires a few slight changes as to how I'll manage the debate. And so therefore, can all attendees mute their microphones unless I invite them to speak? This will avoid disruption and background noise. Can all participants please keep their cameras on during the meeting? All participants will be invited to introduce themselves at the start of the public session to make it clear to the public observers who will be involved in the proceedings. So I ask you for your assistance and patience while I go through this process. In order to avoid any disruption to the meeting, should I lose internet connectivity, I propose we appoint a vice chair who could step in my absence, and I move Councillor Jules Heselwood and invite another member to second that motion, please.
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooks. So I'll take her vote by assuming your silence is an approval. Any objectors? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. Councillor Heselwood will be the vice chair for this meeting. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphones once you've introduced yourself? And I'll start, as always, in alphabetical order with Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Councillor Brooks.
Councillor Kayleigh Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Councillor Colin Campbell here out in a rather damp Otley.
Councillor Finnegan.
Robert Finnegan, I'm a councillor for the Morley North Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Heselwood.
Councillor Julia Heselwood and Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Councillor Hamilton.
Councillor Sharon Hamilton, Meanwood and Moortown Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Reagan.
Councillor Reagan, Denise Reagan from Bermondsey and Richmond Hill Ward.
Councillor Shemilt.
Councillor Jackie Shemilt, Horsforth Ward.
Councillor Ray.
Councillor Paul Ray from Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Thank you. I'll now move on to officers and I'll call you by first names if that's all right. Jonathan.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
David.
Good afternoon, David Newbury, Lead Officer for the panel, standing in for Steve Butler.
Nicole.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nicole Walker, Legal Advisor to the panel, and my colleague Nikki Diol, who will remain off camera until I lose connection.
Thank you. Andy.
Good afternoon, it's Andy Tickett, Highways and Transportation. My colleague Catherine Camule is on the call and we'll be dealing with the Cockshot Lane application.
Thank you, Andy. Richard.
Yeah, good afternoon, Richard Smith, Principal Planner in the South and West team.
Toby.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Technical Officer, and in case I lose connectivity, it'll be Max Walton who'll be back up on the presentation.
Thank you. Andy, I think you've already introduced yourself, but you can do so again if you wish. Boo.
Yep, Andy Boo, Governance Services, Clerk to the panel.
Thank you. Richard Marsh.
Yes, the other Richard, afternoon. Yeah, Richard Marsh, Nature Conservation Officer.
And Seamus. Oh, Seamus is on call, isn't he? Through a messaging in case we need him. That's right. Okay, so moving to agenda item number 1. Andy, if you could deal with the procedural issues for us, please.
Right, thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item number 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press and public. Under item number 3, I'm not aware of any late items of business. Under agenda item number 4, have members got any disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Right, I'll take that as a no. And moving on to item number 5, we've not had any apologies for absence.
Okay, so that takes us on to item 6, the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 10th of December. They are very short, 2 pages. So can I ask members if they find those a correct record, a true and correct record of the meeting?
They are, Chair, move on, please.
Thank you very much. Are there any matters arising from the minutes that anybody would wish to raise? I'll just pause a couple of seconds there, give people a chance. No, thank you. Well, that takes us on to item number 7, the reserved matters application for the houses and apartments at Kirkstall Forge. Richard, could I invite you to do the presentation for us, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Toby, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, Chair, this presentation today is for consideration of a new reserved matters application at Kirkstall Forge on the plots E and F, which is phase 2. This follows 2 previous reserved matters approvals for the same plots in 2017, which was before South and West Plans Panel, and 2018. This latest reiteration is for the following as detailed. And as you can see in the title there, it's for 213 dwellings up to 2,076 square metres of commercial floor space, which I would like to just make an update on the presentation that at paragraph 6 of your report pack, there's actually a mistake there that quotes it as 2,400. It is, as per the title there, 2,076 square metres of commercial floor space. In use class E or class sui generis, that's the old format use classes, but still relevant for this application, and use class sui generis hot food takeaways, pubs, drinking establishments, amenity space, and a new public square. The reserved matters applied for are as follows: siting, design, external appearance, and landscaping. And that is again going back off the old format, which is relevant as part of the original outline application. For this site, we need to discharge conditions 1, 2, and 3 of the outline application, which has previously approved the matter of access already. Next slide, please, Toby. This is the site subject of the reserved matters today. As mentioned, it will be referred to as plots E and F, or phase 2. Next slide, please. In terms of the site and surrounding context, this slide shows the wider Kirkstall Forge estate subject to the approved outline application. The site extends to nearly 23 hectares of land, broadly rectangular, set southwest off the A65 Abbey Road, and where it's accessed currently off the western access. A further eastern access point also exists in the opposite end of the site as a secondary future access. This site also includes some key other routes through it, namely the River Aire, as you can see, the Leeds, Shipley, Ilkley railway line, which includes the recently opened, or not so recent now, 2016 Kirkstall Forge train station. And number 3, it also has the Leeds-Liverpool Canal just touching through the southern end of the site. Other than the railway station and the new internal road connected to the A65, the site currently contains plot J1, an office building of just over 15,000 square metres. Next slide, please. Plots E and F would be set in between the new road that's been created, which is called Butler's Wharf, and the A65. It is characterised by rising topography to the nearer A65, which includes an established line of woodland trees and planting, which runs broadly perpendicular with the A65. The site extends to just over 3 hectares, this reserve matters. Next slide, please, Toby. Plots E and F can be seen in the context of the indicative master plan attributed to the outline approval. A key feature of this master plan is linking up with the original outline design statement is the creation of a stitch, a key pedestrian stroke public realm space and route which links the north and south boundaries together and the green infrastructure to either side. Next slide, please. This slide shown in red within the Kirkstall Forge site shows the reserve matters, and it just shows the extent of the wider outline application site, the blue line. Next slide, please. Looking closer at the red line reserve matters site itself, it can be seen set above the office building J1, known as also number 1 building, which is set adjacent to the new railway station. The western access to the Kirkstall Forge estate is shown in the top left, and the route of Butler's Wharf runs around plot C and F. I mentioned earlier that 2 previous applications for reserve matters have been approved. The proposals before you today are very similar in their overall layout to those previous consents. Therefore, what can currently be seen on site is a couple of prototype houses, which were finished actually in 2020 and form part of the previous reserve matters approval. These, alongside some initial road length that's been laid in the middle spine road, Isabella Avenue, have been delivered on site and occupied since completion to allow the applicant CG to market test this product as being fit for purpose and developed for the future townhouses that will come forward as part of this reserve matters. Next slide, please. Some photos then. So looking southeast, this photo looks upon the site as set behind the hoardings when approaching from the western access. Number 1 building, plot J1, can be seen in the foreground. Next slide, please. This photo shows Isabella Avenue with the woodlands to the left and number 1 on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. This photo shows the 2 prototype houses in the foreground, just upon entering through the very early stages of Isabella Avenue. This photo shows a view broadly to the east upon the bend in the approach road Butler's Wharf. Next slide, that was Toby. That's the photo there showing the bend in the road on the approach road to Butler's Wharf. Next slide, please, Toby. This photo shows a view looking north, taken from the point just prior to where Butler's Wharf then turns for a second time, turns the corner over the river to the south. So it shows the fronts of the 2 prototype dwellings just behind the hoardings there. Next slide, please. Another photo looking back to the northwest showing the extent of the site frontage, Butler's Wharf. Next slide, please. This slide shows the first of the reserve matters approved by South and West Plans Panel in November 2017, which was for 112 dwellings made up of 75 houses and 18 apartments. It contained 2,925 square metres of commercial space set around the area occupied by a new landmark building called the Pavilion. Next slide, please. This is the second reserve matters approved. The 2018 application, I refer to it, but it was actually approved in May 2019. It was slightly different to the previous scheme, the 2017 scheme that is, with an increase in dwellings to 135 as approved. And this was made up of 81 houses and 54 apartments. It also contained 2,400 square metres of commercial floor space, again slightly less than the 2017 approval. The increase in apartments, however, was the subject of an amended layout, and therefore it provided 2 conventional blocks rather than courtyard style footprints of the previous scheme. Next slide, please. This is the proposed reserve matters before us today, which is now proposing 213 dwellings, and that is made up of 77 houses and 136 apartments. There is 2,076 square metres of commercial floor space. In terms of the changes from the previous approval in May 2019, the increase in the apartment numbers has seen the new designs affecting primarily the 2 blocks, which we will refer to as E2 and E3. And they are principally positioned as before, but we have now had a reconfiguration internally and externally to make more effective and efficient use of space, particularly at the upper floor levels. To do this, 4 houses have been removed from the original scheme, the 2018 scheme, and that's 1 from each corner of the houses that surround the footprints of E2, E3. That's created a bit more breathing space and allows the amenity space for the apartments to better relate to the houses on either side. Next slide, please, Toby. This slide shows the May 2019 approved reserve matters relating to blocks E2 and E3, either side of the pavilion building and the stitch. The pavilion building is the building right in the centre. Next slide, please. This slide shows the new application, the same group of buildings in the new reserve matters. This additional breathing space I referred to is set either side of the commercial units, and that's meant that the new layout provides better servicing arrangements of these units. A new ramp system into the side of the pavilion building will allow for easier movement up to the middle road and beyond into the pocket park. Previously, this was to be accessed by an external mechanically operated ramp platform lift system. Next slide, please. The previous 2018 reserve matters approval showed 53 car parking spaces for the apartments at nearly 1 per unit. However, some of these were double stacked, as you can see in that layout there. These were entered directly via ramped access off Isabella Avenue, the access road. Next slide, please. The new scheme reflects the aspirations of the applicant to make this a build-to-rent model of apartment living. The 136 apartments will be served off the same level, but in a more accessible configuration, totaling 52 car parking spaces. Whilst this is a different ratio, it reflects the new model of development CG wish to build and their aspirations to promote the site's other transport links of rail, cycle and bus travel. The highways consultation is accepted in this position, noting that the calculations afforded within the street design guide under method 2 allow for consideration of rental developments like this more specifically, and that's based on DCLG guidance and experience on such developments. However, alongside this would be further controlled through the same mechanisms as that of approved commercial office blocks K3, K4. Those were approved in May 2020, and those blocks, whilst not built, are a live consent, which would primarily sit opposite plot J1. This requires the usual submission, or this would require the usual submission of a travel plan, updated and reviewed every year, and a fallback temporary parking management plan should parking pressure become evident on the wider site, which can be controlled and contained nearby within the Kirkstall Forge estate. This is considered to form an appropriate balance between encouraging sustainable travel patterns, the new form of development as a build-to-rent model, and ensuring that parking pressures do not leak into neighbouring communities. This does, however, Chair, require an extra condition, as was used at K3, K4, to more specifically control travel plan issues on this individual phase. And that is subject of an additional condition that doesn't actually feature within the report pack, but certainly one that we would like to include as part of any final approval of reserve matters. And that would be consistent with K3, K4. Next slide, please, Toby. This slide shows the upper floor levels of the previous 2018 reserve matters application. Next slide, please. This slide shows the new upper floor layouts. It shows some private decked amenity space to level 2 on the sides, as you can see there. Next slide, please. This shows the top floor of the previous 2018 reserve matters. Next slide, please. These next two slides show the new top 2 floors, 3-bed units they are, benefiting from some further private external amenity space, which alongside the provision of balconies across upper floors has flowed from positive pre-application discussions with the architects, particularly in the light of the current pandemic. Next slide, please, Toby. This shows the top floor level of the new scheme. Next slide, please. This here shows the 2018 reserve matters scheme on the left-hand side. The new scheme to the right-hand side is shown clearly with the new CGIs. Broadly speaking, a very similar arrangement insofar as siting and massing is concerned. The changes are more down to detailed external treatment and the internal changes that allow for increased unit numbers for efficient layout of accommodation. Next slide, please. This is the view from the pocket park to the rear of the pavilion building, looking approximately south to southwest. You've got the old scheme on the left again, and the new scheme on the right. Next slide, please. This slide shows the finer detail that's gone into replicating the forge's history in the perforation of openings within the detailed design pack. And this displays particularly for the parking level at first floor for natural ventilation purposes, and also affects areas such as some of the bedrooms, the apartments. Obviously, the architects have worked hard at trying to replicate some of the history of the forge in that detailed design. Hopefully that's coming through on the slides. Next slide, please. A further slide which shows the overall window, panel and brick detail. Next slide, please. This slide shows the top 3 floors as shown. Next slide, please. We've got some sections here which show the massing arrangements in the context of plot J1, which is on the right-hand side as built, and how it would all be linked together via the stitch. You can see there, obviously, the blocks E2 and E3, and then in the white, you can see obviously the houses that are being developed as part of this same residential phase. The massing, again, very similar to the previous scheme. Next slide, please. These are some views looking northeast of the 3 terraces that you would have created as part of the topographical changes on the site. So you've got the top terrace at the top, you've got the middle section there, which shows what you'd see there, Isabella Avenue behind it. And then you've got the bottom section there, what you'd see from Butler's Wharf. Next slide, please. This CGI is taken if looking northeast near to the new train station upon arrival. This view looks across the new public realm that will be created between plots J1 and as yet to be built K3, K4, and create the further link of the stitch between the plots here, the commercial plots, and obviously the new residential phase 2 in front of you. Next slide, please. This is the view from the pocket park looking downward, southwest, back towards the train station. Next slide, please. This is a view on approach via Butler's Wharf. Note the consistency of metalwork to the balconies, linking the dwellings with the openings of the apartments and the commercial units, all in the same finish, colour, material. Next slide, please. Lastly, just a couple of images showing the accommodation that's been provided as part of the prototype houses as finished and occupied. These, as I say, these have been market tested by CEG, and obviously, hopefully, will give an idea of the likely quality of accommodation that will be provided, certainly within the dwellings. Next slide, please. And again, a further image of that detail. So therefore, the recommendation, Chair, is to approve this latest reserve matters based on the conditions, which is consistent with the previous consents as outlined within the report, and with the added condition of the extra requirement for Pacific Phase 2 travel plan details to be submitted. And as I say, that is consistent with the approval for office plots K3, K4. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Richard. There are no speakers against this application, so the following people are in attendance should we wish to direct any questions to them on behalf of the development. James Shimwell, Gareth Chambers, Dominic Crowley, Michael Hepburn, Emma Bramley, Peter Cartwright, James McLaren and Thomas Bone. They are present, they are listening to the debate, and should we wish to call them to the front for questioning, they are available. So we can now turn to members' questions to officers, please. If you would use your electronic hand, and Right. So I can't see any hands at the moment. Questions to officers?
You've got
I've
Colin.
got questions, Chair, and I can't seem to find the hands up thing.
Oh, right, okay. Just for your information, if you go into participants, Councillor Finlay, you can see at the bottom you've got a facility that says raise hand.
No worries. I'll
Yeah.
raise it and wait for others who've already done it.
Okay, Councillor Brooks, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, how much usable space makes a flat type A? Because I can see that it's a bit of a funny shape. And I'm wondering if any wind modelling has been done, because it looks like there's potential for some wind tunnels to be formed. And also, has any thought been given to where kids can play?
Richard, do you want to start us off with answers to that question?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Chair. So in terms of wind modelling, we've got no specific wind modelling that's been undertaken on this particular phase. There isn't, we feel, necessity to do that given the massing and the context. Obviously, as part of the original outline, which does date back a number of years now, there wasn't a requirement for any specific wind testing on future phases. That said, obviously we do assess things with regard to this in terms of, existing tall buildings design guide, and certainly in terms of the massing and the context, we didn't feel that it fell within those parameters where it is substantially higher than its surrounding context. So we haven't done any, or I haven't requested any requirement for wind testing or modelling of the current phases. I mean, they are very, very similar in terms of height to the previous approval. So in that sense, we're following the existing massing that we've previously approved. In terms of the recreational space, obviously, the pocket park is something that, we've been keen to, obviously make sure flows consistently with the previous scheme. So that's where, we would like to see, certainly children's play space alongside, obviously, the accessible woodland area. Now, obviously, you've got the riverside walks and the canal, towpath, etc. It is obviously an area where, in terms of the residential units, we've got fully enclosed gardens, etc. And one thing with the apartments, although the apartments is broadly a similar ratio in terms of 1, 2, and 3 bed, we've obviously tried to get some more private amenity space within certainly some of the apartments. So, I mean, broadly speaking, I think it's very consistent with the previous schemes for children's play. But obviously, it is a site where, we are looking at the surrounding context to provide amenity as well as, obviously the immediate plots themselves. And that's part of the feel for Kirkstall Forge, is that there are woodland walks and there are obviously, there's a certain level of nature within the area in terms of Bramley Fall Park as well, that hopefully provides a good level of amenity for residents. And then the other issue about the apartment, I think it was the apartment A, was it? I think it was, you mentioned. It might be worth maybe just bringing the architects in on that. Was it apartment A, did you mention, Councillor?
It was the one you showed on the slides, Richard. I think.
Yeah, it was apartment A. It's quite a funny shape. The previous plans had the layout there, but with this we've just got the empty shells. So I'm finding it difficult to visualise how that space would work as a livable space.
Could we have the architect come forward and address that one for us, please?
Yes, hi, it's Peter Cartwright. I'm not too sure which flat plan or apartment plan A you're referring to, but the dimensions and the layout for this latest scheme are very even, regular spaces. The previous scheme had very long, thin apartment buildings. These buildings are set out with dual aspect on the corners, so bedrooms and living spaces have the benefit of the corners, whereas the apartments which are in the centre of the plan have generous windows to both bedrooms and to the living areas. And again, Juliet, balconies to some of them and balconies to the southern facade. So we don't have any irregular shaped plans at all of this apartment scheme. They're very simple, orthogonal, and are to space standards.
Can I just jump in there as well, Pete? That apartment A is actually 2 square metres larger than national space standard requires, and we've planned it out quite effectively. So the bedroom actually sits in the part that's behind the core, and then the space that you've seen as the rectilinear where the entrance is, that's where you get the kitchen living area. And it becomes quite a natural space and natural progression into that bedroom space behind the lift core.
Yeah. Thank you, Emma. Councillor Brooks, do you want to come back?
Yeah, so it was slide 23, and it's that one there. So what's the space like where the door is going into what would be the bedroom area?
It's very
like
open.
Yeah, it's that.
Yeah, but what area? Because it looks like a corridor sort of shape to me.
The bedroom itself is a designated bedroom with its own door, has an ensuite with it, and then we have a through kitchen dining all the way to the outside wall. So there's no internal corridor as such.
So why haven't you showed us those plans?
Well,
please?
we can certainly share a plan with you to show you what it looks like. We're more than happy to do that.
Yes, please.
In fairness, Councillor Brooks, the plans do exist. I think Richard just hasn't chosen to include them in his presentation, so I wouldn't lay that entirely at the feet of the architect. But is there one up now? Is somebody going to speak to this?
Yes, that's right, Chair. What I've tried to do is sort of not oversupply a large number of plans, because I know obviously we've got 2 previous consents, and I didn't want to sort of over provide a level of detail that would sort of give you almost too much information. But yes, there are floor plans that are provided, but obviously we on the presentation we've just tried to focus in on, you know, essentially how that apartment would sit, and obviously the internal configuration, as Peter says, that, you know, we can put that on a screen if required.
Are you happy to move on at this stage, Kaylee, or do you want that plan bringing up?
I would like the plan bringing up, please.
Okay, can we bring the plan up, please?
Okay. Do you want me to do that, Peter, or would you like me to, or would you like to do that?
I'm just trying to find the best way of us sharing the latest plan with you. Is that?
I'm just trying to find the plan now, Pete.
Richard, if you're in a position to do it, I think you're probably in the best position to do it.
I'm just looking for it now, Chair. So I'll just try and find it on the system. It might be as good if Emma can get it as well.
I think we'll do it if that's okay, because we can show you exactly how the layout's working, where we've taken into the kitchen space, living space, and the bedroom.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. While you're finding that and getting ready to bring it up, I'm going to take the next question, and then we'll come back to that plan. Councillor Campbell.
Right. Can I ask? Well, can I make a couple of points and ask some questions? First of all, if you want, I don't know which version you have, but on the version of Zoom that I've got, you have to click on reactions to put your hand up. The second thing is that my screen is occupied exclusively by Mr. Carr, which is very nice, but I can't see anybody else when they're speaking. So I'm just wondering if there's a fault somewhere in my system.
Have you gone on to view, Colin, and tapped on the icon that helps you to see everybody? Perhaps you've accidentally gone on to portrait or whatever they call it.
Let me just try. I've got it's ticked for speaker.
Yeah, well, that means you'll only see the speaker.
I should be seeing you, but I'm not.
Anyway, carry on, and you can experiment in the background.
3 questions. I suppose the simple one, because we in the documentation there's a huge list of relevant policies. The basic question is it policy compliant? So that's question number one. Question number two relates to cycle parking. There is a reference to charging points for cars, but it would seem to me, and I think we raised it perhaps a couple of cycles ago at City Plans, there is a case now, I think, for providing charging facilities at cycle parking points because more people are buying electric bikes, and you don't really need to either to take the bike into your flat to charge it or take the battery in. So I just wondered if somebody looked at that. Number three, the balconies. Can you tell us how big the balconies are? Because it's very difficult to work out from looking at the drawings whether it's in effect big enough to get a table and a couple of chairs that's not squashed, so you can actually sit on the balcony and enjoy the sunset. And finally, as this is the third version of this that we've seen, when do you expect to be on site? Right,
Okay.
yeah.
So for the questions that Richard can answer, we'll start off with you, and then we'll move to representatives of the applicant if we need to. Richard.
Yeah, in terms of cycle parking, the development would provide 229 secure spaces, long stay spaces, that is, which is based on 1 per dwelling and 1 per apartment, and also there's 16 for the commercial space. There's also 31 short stay spaces dotted around the development. In terms of sort of connecting up to things like electric cycle charging, I'm not aware that we've gone into that level of detail, but I know the world's rapidly changing, and we obviously have a condition to agree the cycle parking details, and we can certainly look at that as part of the scheme. I'm sure Kirkstall Forge would be wanting to do that themselves, because obviously it's it's a good route for cyclists in terms of the canal, the A65, etc. So the intention is to provide space for each resident for a cycle space. We have got electric vehicle charging, so I guess there must be, I'm sure within the design, the ability to obviously have an area for electric cycle charging. Maybe might be good to ask Kirkstall Forge a little bit more about that if you wish.
I'm making a list, Richard, of things to ask Kirkstall Forge about, so that's one of them. So if you'd like to address any other areas before we go back.
Yeah, can you just remind me on the second question there, please, Chair? Sorry, from Councillor Campbell.
Actually, it was the balcony size.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, well, certainly the balconies have been designed to allow for tables and chairs. We had that discussion with the architects. So yes, I mean, I think they would be better placed to say exactly what the exact square meterage is, but it was the intention that we would provide a decent area of amenity space. This all went back to the pre-application discussions that were happening during the pandemic, and our architects alongside themselves were keen to look at how we can improve upon the original design by having more private amenity space, because obviously it's recognised that people in apartment living can't necessarily expect to obviously use some of the public realm areas intensively now, given obviously what we're going through. So that's one good aspect of the scheme, is that each apartment has certainly more amenity space or a better range of amenity space, and certainly some of the apartments on certainly the south facing side have the ability to have tables and chairs. Absolutely.
Okay, are we ready to come back up with the plan of the flat now, please?
We are.
Thank you.
Can everyone? Oh no, there we go.
It's coming up now.
It's coming up then.
Can everyone see that?
Yep, we've got it.
So obviously there's a very, very slight amendment to the internal wall position, just as we're making final tweaks to the layout. But you can see here that you enter in this zone, you get a very clear visual sightline through sliding windows, and then the bedroom sits in what is effectively behind the circulation core here. So it is quite a standard layout if you take away the L shape.
And works well for a
Does
41 square meter, 1-bedroom apartment.
Yeah. So it's 2 square meters bigger than the standard national space standard 1-bed 1-person apartment, and it's obviously 4 square meters bigger than the provision if you only provide a shower.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks, do you wish to comment?
Yeah, I mean that plan doesn't really correlate with what I can see on this layout here.
The party wall's got a slight tweak to it, but that's just because we're constantly refining how the internal layout works. But the broad area is pretty much identical to what's in that plan there.
So that's the current plan that you've got up there on the screen.
That's correct.
The layout, yeah, the layout side that pretty much identical. This wall has just lost a kink. This party wall here.
Yeah.
So
right.
in fact, that replaces what Councillor Brooks is looking at. Is that what you're telling us?
The internal wall, but the external wall is identical.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Brooks.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Lovely. Councillor Finnegan, thank you for your patience.
No worries. Thank you, Chair. 3 questions really. Could the highways officer explain to me how 52 car parking spaces for 136 apartments actually works in practical terms, taking it that's just about, although my maths isn't brilliant, about a third of a parking spot per apartment. So I'd be interested in hearing how that works through. What evidence is there that there is a demand for 1-bedroomed flats, taking it that there are 80 1-bedroomed flats, and in my view that encourages a transitory population and neighbourhood and doesn't necessarily work, but I'll be interested in the evidence and how that is policy compliant. And the third one is EN1 and EN2 doesn't seem to be mentioned at this particular point. Why not? And does that make it non-policy compliant? And what contributions is this making towards reducing the impact of global warming? Thank you.
Thank you. Andy, would you like to start us off on the parking issues, please? I think you're on mute, Andy.
Is that working?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. So on a practical basis, the parking is within basements and will be effectively access will be controlled by a fob or such other mechanism. So the only people that will be able to park in the basement are ones that have chosen to lease a space in the basement and paid for it. So as a resident coming to that block of flats, you will know whether you've got a parking space or not, and your decision about whether to take a flat there is clearly influenced by that fact. In terms of numbers, the only really major piece of research that has been done on it was actually a DCLG research paper back in 2007, but that was looked at census data and demonstrated that the rental, basically a property that's rented tends to have a lower parking demand than a property that's been bought on the open market, and that actually, I had a look at the census data for the 2011 census, and certainly that is still the case as a pattern, that if you look at an owned property, that the parking, the car parking ownership is much higher than it is for a rented property. So I think we are comfortable that the level of parking proposed fits with the the guidance that was prepared through the DCLG research that has been taken into the our street design guide. And really, the point that Richard was addressing at the outset is that fallback position should parking demand exceed the expected demand. I don't know if that helps.
Richard, do you want to say a word again about the condition you were explaining earlier on in the travel plan?
Yeah, I can do, Chair. Yep. Something we did with K3 and K4, the office block there, where what the ultimate end goal is to encourage sustainable travel, because we've got a good railway station now on site. We do have buses on the A65. We do have cycle routes through the site. So although it obviously clearly isn't a city centre location, it does have a range of modal split travel patterns to it. So essentially what we're trying to do is work with the developer and encourage that sustainability. But whilst we recognise that people do still own cars, we've got a mechanism that we've used previously on K3, K4, and would do the same here, where we have a submission of a travel plan, which is part of the outline condition requirements anyhow, but very specific to this phase, that essentially every year looks to update us and subject to our agreement that we're comfortable that that sustainable travel is being promoted within the Kirkstall Forge site. And I'm absolutely certain that, from my experience of working with Kirkstall Forge CEG, that sustainable travel is very much part of their business plan, and they will continue to do that. That said, obviously, we would look to use the same approved document that we did on K3, K4 with a slight amendment that effectively allows for alternative options for temporary car parking if parking does become a problem. We don't feel that it necessarily would, but if there was pressures within the wider community where we were aware that parking was spilling out into a much wider radius, and obviously it allows us, as part of the travel plan condition as well, to control any future temporary solutions, whilst obviously we explore that in further detail, whether that's through additional traffic regulation orders or such like. But as Andy says, I think the intention is that residents, it won't be unallocated parking free for all. It will be on a basis of residents will know if they have a space or not, and it's up to them whether those that don't have a space are happy to obviously take an apartment on with other sustainable travel choices. So that's how we're looking to control it, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. And while we have you, perhaps you'd like to comment on the policy compliance aspect of the question. I will invite Councillor Finnegan to come back again at the end of the questions, at the end of his questions.
Yeah, that's on obviously, on policy EN1. Again, we've taken a very consistent approach, as we did on the two previous reserve matters, and obviously as it was looked upon then, it was appreciated that the original outline did date before the core strategy. So there was, as part of the outline consent under condition 10A, there's a requirement that sustainability appraisal needs to be submitted for approval to each particular reserve matters. Now, obviously, that allows us to look closely at the details of how that would fit with policy EN1. We've had an energy statement provided, which gives some ideas of how they would be looking to meet that policy. And we have got a specialist from Hawley, that's part of the consultant team, looking at how certainly both the apartments and the dwellings will be able to meet policy EN1. I think, again, like we did with the previous reserve matters, we would just be looking to control that through the condition carefully. Some initial ideas that they've outlined, though, is that they would have a 13.9% betterment over the current Part L building regulations. I know that the emissions target can change and is due to potentially change soon, but certainly in terms of meeting policy EN1, we would look to obviously improve on that where we could. The further on in the statement, it identifies that there are some carbon reducing factors that they are working on closely. And I know from the building that they've worked on, plot J1, it's very highly energy efficient, and I think we'll be looking for that sort of quality of heat recovery to be provided as part of the commercial units and the apartments at least. Obviously, there's other issues that they're going to provide, like air source heat pumps for domestic hot water. There's a range of measures, and obviously it's a highly sustainable site in itself in terms of where it's located. So I think we're confident we could, through the condition, that we can again address EN1, because obviously policy EN1 has come about since 2014, and that obviously is very much after the original outline was written and consented. So, you know, we're working with what we've got, but, you know, we certainly feel we can, you know, we can go further, and that's what the condition discharge would do.
And EN2?
Yeah, EN2 as well. It might be worth possibly on both, actually. He's asking Hor Lee, who are here, just to talk a little bit more about both, because I do think you know, that as I say, we haven't gone into a finer level of detail now, because obviously it's condition discharge, but they would probably do a better job than I would in turning and explain that detail.
Thank you, and I've added it to the list to go back to them on. That's helpful. I think, Councillor Finnegan, you were wanting to know about policy compliance altogether, not just EN1 and EN2. In officers' view, is it policy compliant overall?
Just for the sake of clarification, yeah, there's no condition at the beginning of the report about EN1 or EN2, so I'm not sure how they're going to condition that. I have a concern about 80 one-bedroom flats. Taking into account that we're supposed to be able to evidence the need for that in terms of housing mix. I'm just wondering why or how or what evidence there is to support that contention that we need 80 one-bedroom flats at this location.
Richard?
Well, I mean, broadly, the housing mix, you know, does seem to, in our view, work with obviously the policy H4. You know, certainly what we've tried to do actually on this scheme is try and get a few more 3-bed apartments to just try and vary it up a little bit, because some of the previous schemes were primarily weighted towards 1 and 2-bed. So I think we've tried to get, you know, a reasonable mix over and above the previous scheme, but again, it kind of goes back to the outline, and because obviously housing mix wasn't a requirement then, obviously we're working with what we've got with the current outline consent. But that said, I think we do feel that it certainly meets policy H4. I mean, there are obviously variations of how many 1-bed that you could have within that, but you know, certainly the improvement in 3-bed, I think we feel has the right balance of 1, 2, 3-bed. Obviously the dwellings themselves are 3, 4, 5-bed. So taken across the whole of the scope of the site, I think it's a good mix overall.
I'm sure you'll want to pick that up in comments, Councillor Finnegan. I have seen Councillor Heselwood and Councillor Hamilton, but I suspect David wants to come in on the current subject being discussed. David?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. It was just really a matter just about what we're considering today. I suppose the application now in front of members is one of the reserved matters. So it's just about the details of the siting, the design, the external appearance and landscaping. Matters of housing mix really are matters which would fall with the consideration of the outline. So we're sort of beyond that stage, but I appreciate that it does get confused and the waters do get muddied, because naturally in the reports and naturally as members, you tend to look at the broad spectrum of policies, and we tend to look at the broad spectrum of policies. And so when we're talking about design, we start talking about space standards and space standards being met. So there is some grey areas, but matters such as housing mix really are a matter for the outline, not a matter which is before us today.
Thank you very much, David. That's helpful clarification. Councillor Heselwood, please.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to come in on the travel, the sustainable travel, because obviously we, as Richard has said, we've got the our ward borders this development, and we've got the train station plus the canal that a lot of people use to walk and cycle into the city centre as well. So as far as, you know, there's parking spaces, as a ward councillor who borders this, I don't think we'll have that much of a problem with parking. I think people will take advantage of the of all those amenities around them, and you know, to travel rather than drive.
Thank you. We are into comments on that one, actually, Jules, but I'll take Councillor Hamilton. I'm sure she's got a question.
Yes, my question, Chair, was regarding the 54 parking space. How many disabled space are included in there? And just also to ask, I know the Civic Trust, of the last point, block E2 and E3, I just want to know if it's been looked at, or, you know, their suggestion regarding the benefit from gating system and the natural light and ventilation for the patios. And just want to know if those were looked at and have they been addressed.
Thank you. We'll go back to you to start with, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of the ventilation, that's something that we've worked on with the architects in terms of that bay detail, the perforation slides that we saw earlier, showing how the Kirkstall Forge history will, you know, allow for obviously quite a characteristic piece of metal work there, but also allowing at the same time the natural ventilation to get into the car park. So it's something that yeah, Civic Trust did raise, and something that we've picked up as well. But certainly, you know, there is a condition also on the reserve matters consistent with the previous schemes that essentially would prove the detail of the natural ventilation to the car park units. But we're confident that you know, that work the architects have done will be fit for purpose. And certainly improves upon the previous schemes in that sense. Yeah, in terms of the car parking arrangements and the accessible spaces, I'm just going to bring up, we certainly look for obviously the 5% car parking, but I'm just trying to find I don't know if perhaps Toby can go back to that particular slide, which is, I think, let's have a look. I think it might be slide 21. Toby can bring that up, slide 21. It shows the 4 disabled spaces there as part of the overall provision, meeting that 5%. So obviously, yes, there is disabled provision within the layout, and obviously, you know, it's something that the architects could comment on further. But if you also compare it to the previous scheme, which is slide 20, Toby, hoping you can do that. Don't know if you just bring up slide 20. Then it shows, obviously, clearly we didn't have that disabled car parking space. So again, we've tried to improve the scheme as we've gone along, and that's something that's come out of the parking changes.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton, do you want to come back?
Yes, Chair. I just wanted Councillor Brooke question regarding play area around the blocks. I don't think that was answered.
No, it wasn't. I've made a note that we're going to go back to Kirkstall Forge colleagues on that. I've got a list of things to go back to them on. Thank you, Sharon. I don't think I see any fresh hands up, so perhaps we could go down my list. I've got 4 items: children's play, bike charging, balcony space, EN1 and EN2. So could we ask about the children's play first of all? Could somebody from the Kirkstall Forge team shed any light on that? As has already been said, this is a development with a lot of natural space and green space, so that there is scope for recreation. But I think the question specifically was about children.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is James Shimwell, CG. I'll answer some of the questions. If it's okay with you, Chair, I'll bring in the architects and the engineers if more details needed. Children's play is a good question. the location of the children's play will be on an area, what we call the pocket park, which is a landscaped area in between the two houses, just above where the apartments are going to be. So that's been designed and is permitted within the existing reserve matters consent. So children's play is considered, and it is part of the landscape design. I don't know whether Peter, is that okay, or do you need to see it on a drawing?
Sharon, you're on mute, but I saw you nodding.
I was just saying, yes, please. I'd like to see it.
Okay.
I have the drawing up ready to go.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma.
Oh, wrong one, sorry. There we go. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we
okay.
can.
Yeah, so just to sort of, well, hopefully it's relatively clear where we are. So the two apartment buildings are right in front of us. And then to the left-hand side, just above the left-hand apartment building, is where the two prototype houses have been constructed. And just to the right of that is the area that we call the pocket park. So within that will be designed the children's play area, and it has a connection up. And I mean, it shows there like there's a big kind of river running through, which there isn't at the moment. So the connection up into those woods, there'll be a landscape woodland walk that we're just trying to figure out what we do with the water course at the moment, whether it's worth making it into a water course. So the objective is that it would be water. We're not quite sure how practical that is at the moment, but fundamentally that's where the children's play area will be, in the pocket park just between the houses.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Sharon, Councillor Hamilton? Oh, so it was that Emma.
Sorry, I was just going to add that the features for the children's play is designed to be quite natural, and so you tying into the area and the aesthetic of the landscape rather than kind of like the swings and slides sort of vibe.
Yeah, I'm very pleased personally to hear that. I think that was in keeping with the area. Thank you. Okay, so the next area I had was bike charging on my list.
Yes, so we have bike charging within the cycle store, and there's a bike charge point within the Stitch Square, within the landscape area between the two buildings. I don't know, Tom Bone of Hawley, whether you want to elaborate on that anymore for everybody.
Not a great deal. Hello, Thomas Bone calling from Hawley. We are both on the M&E and sustainability consultancy side for on behalf of CEG. So as was mentioned earlier, the current kind of scheme obviously predates the current core strategy. Notwithstanding, CEG are obviously very aware of where the scheme sits in terms of cycle routes and it being used by both people that occupy the site, that live there and work there, but also passing through. So yeah, there is a definite desire to include cycle charging provision within the scheme, and that, as we mentioned, is going to kind of, the final detail of that is to be established, but there will absolutely be a provision within these plots and probably within the master plan as well.
Thank you. And EN1 and EN2, is there a member of the team who would like specifically to address those issues?
Yeah, James, you okay with me?
Yes, please. Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, please, Tom. Thanks.
Yep. So once again, the scheme obviously predates the current core strategy in terms of what's been set, but CG is kind of as testament with what happened with number one, the first office building. They're a very forward-thinking developer. Sustainability, carbon is massively up on one of the top things on their agenda because it's on everyone's agenda now. So if I'm okay to bring up just a small kind of diagram to support what I'm saying, is that okay?
Yes, that's okay.
So hopefully you can see a graph on your screen now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so policy EN1 is all about carbon emissions, and the CG are more than aware that we're in a climate emergency. So what this scheme is looking at is tracking the decarbonisation that we're seeing in the national grid. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, we're seeing much more renewables being introduced in the national grid, more wind, more solar, which is bringing down the carbon factor of grid electricity. As a result of that, the scheme is aiming to move away from relying on combustion sources, especially for the denser areas like the apartments. So these different graphs here simulate, this is where we'd currently stand in current regulations. You may have also seen the government has announced the Future Home Standard and some changes to the building regulations expected at the end of this year, which is going to update to suit this decarbonisation in the grid. So the scheme is already looking at that and responding to that ahead of really statutory policy. So if we start taking some of the more realistic carbon factors, you can see the scheme is producing like well over 55% carbon reductions. And as the national grid becomes more decarbonised, the scheme will emit even less carbon. So by the point of 2030, we're looking at a potential kind of over 90% carbon reduction, which is well in excess of the EN1 20% requirement.
Thank you.
Did you want me to touch on EN2?
Please, if you would. Yeah.
So EN2 concerns both BREEAM for non-residential areas over 1,000 square meters. So that is being considered by the applicant on this scheme. We've submitted both an energy strategy and a sustainability statement with the application. The other part of EN2 that is important is to do with water conservation, the total amount of use per day. So that is included, and the applicant plans to adhere to that. I'm just going to change my window if my computer will let me. Here we go. So within the sustainability statement, this provides kind of hopefully a pretty one-page summary of the many aspects of the scheme that are kind of responding to both current policy, even though the scheme predates the current core policy, as well as kind of future policy that we know is happening. So overall, taking a really holistic view to sustainability for this plot and across the wider scheme.
Thank you very much indeed for that. And finally, I think it'll be back to Peter for balcony space, the balcony space question.
Yes, would you like us to share a plan? Would that be, or maybe Richard, if we could go back to the 3D views that were shown in your presentation, which gives a good indication of the areas that we've allocated. I just wanted to reiterate, Richard did say, you know, we can definitely get a table and chairs on them. They're very generous, as well as having our roof terrace level on level 7. So maybe if we just shared that view to show those balconies there.
Toby, if you can, Toby, you can go to slide 36, perhaps, maybe. Might be the best one. Don't know.
Yeah.
There.
Oh yeah, well that's a good one. So I think Richard presented this really well, and we're trying to get some common language with the townhouses as well, with the larger building and the apartment building, and those balconies south facing, generous. I think must be about 1.5 by probably about
1.5 deep. They're just less than 6 square meters, about 5.8 square meters.
Yeah, so I mean, it's it's really lovely and generous to get a table and chairs out there. And as we explained earlier, those are the larger units on the corners that benefit from dual aspects. So certainly everybody will get a table and chairs out there and not be squashed and not being able to use them properly.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's really clear now. Thank you. So I think that concludes questions. Oh, sorry, Councillor Ray, I've seen your hand, and then Councillor Brooks again. Councillor Ray first.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come on to the question of the pocket park in the play area, and I just want to ascertain, what was the decision, and I'm going to slightly disagree with the chair here actually, so I'm probably going to be hot bother. What was the reason for going for a non-formal play area as opposed to what you've gone for? Because I am hoping it's a technical rather than an aesthetic reason, because I'm sure other colleagues on this conversation will probably point out, when we tend to get people ask for play areas, they tend to ask for slides and swings and play and a more formal play equipment. So, and not always, but I also appreciate that this is very close already to woodlands and other green areas. So what was the reason not to add more formal play equipment when it's already got quite good access to green areas to cater for more of the potential options that children might want?
Yeah, I can answer that, Chair, if you wish.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to just work with the original master plan and the original design statement. And I think this idea of having this green stitch was always the concept of where the pocket park provided that transition between some informal recreational space, benches, etc., and some work to that area before it became the natural woodlands area. So we were trying not to overly heavily engineer that space. That said, I think there's a theme coming through here that obviously we do have family housing, and essentially whether you could further look at if what we've provided is fit for purpose for families. But we've always tried to be consistent with the previous outline scheme, which has its own master plan and design code. It wasn't something that was raised through that, but obviously I'm listening to the presentation from others, and I think if Kirkstall Forge are happy, I'm more than happy to re-look at whether we can maybe just get some play equipment within that space on the more accessible level areas. I don't know what the architect's comments are on that.
Peter?
Yes, sorry, Richard. Yes, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we're working with landscape architects as well. So it's certainly something that we can investigate with them.
Thank you. I think Councillor Brooks' hand has gone down and Councillor Campbell's hand has gone up. Councillor Campbell.
Sorry, just a quick one. You remember the picture you showed me of the balconies? Can we find that one again?
Yep.
It's not a balcony question, by the way.
Richard, so go back to the presentation. Is that the,
yeah, Toby, that's slide 36 again, if you can.
There we are. Go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, right. Can I just say, I know you talked about a commonality of materials, I think was the word. But I do get, and we've noticed a lot recently, that I think the phrase is beigeness. Now, I know these are slightly pale bricks, and I won't say they're both beige, but I do wonder if, looking at that streetscape, there's a great deal of similarity about it. And perhaps you could tell me, or perhaps you could even tweak, certainly with the house types, or with the house frontages, is there any mechanism that you've got for sort of creating a bit more individuality?
So,
yeah, Peter.
Yes.
Please.
So maybe, Richard, if we could just scroll back one more slide there, because obviously the beauty of all buildings is in the detail, and one of the things we've been concentrating on is not only the brick detailing, but the bond, so that you get this lovely variation between bricks. And there are, just maybe scroll forward. Was it Richard? Scroll back, please. Just go back a couple more if we may. We had a nice 3D view of, just trying to think of where that, maybe just keep going backwards. Maybe Richard, is that where it was? I think it was the 3D views of the actual, yeah, just so the other way. So if we go back into the presentation, please. Yeah.
Do you want him to keep moving forward?
Yes, please. Yes, if we just keep going.
Yeah, I think it's slide 31, Toby, the Bay study,
yeah.
Slide 31. Or even 30, maybe slide 30.
difficult task, this, isn't it? I'm sorry, Toby.
Well,
You're having quite a challenge today.
I think I hear what you're saying about.
My own PowerPoint's just frozen.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Just talk us through it, Peter.
Well, I think the thing about it is that we believe there will be some subtlety between all the buildings, and certainly, yes, here we go. So you probably can't quite see it on there, but we're using the depth of the piers and the bonding of the piers to be set back to get shadow and natural shadow and definition in the different planes, as opposed to changing, say, brick colors. We're using headers above the windows to create the sort of necessary ornament to reflect that that's doing a job of going over a window. We're setting the bricks back at the parapets, again, to get shadow and interest. So what we're keen on is this sort of honesty of expression, that it's doing an honest job, showing where structure is, showing some depth, showing true bonds of the brickwork to get that variety of header, stretcher, color. So maybe in a computer generated image, it all might look a little bit beige, but in reality, the beauty is in the detail to deliver these schemes. And what we're very keen on is making sure that these buildings are really well designed so that they weather well. And we love the fact that they're going to weather well and grow old gracefully and improve as they get older. And we'll start to build on that lovely pattern as they grow. So I wanted to just say that we hear what you're saying about trying to get some definition between the two, but the way this building is designed is different in the level of detail to the residential smaller buildings. And it's not because then they're designed simpler, but the same brick is in mind to use across the buildings to keep that continuity.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Right, I think we'll move now to comments, please. Comments, views with regard to the recommendation. So I've got Councillor Ray first and then Councillor Campbell again. Councillor Ray?
Thank you, Chair. Overall, really good in most respects. It's obviously been a well-considered design. Like I said, the only caveat being bearing in mind there's large woods nearby, maybe just looking to readdress, not in an overly engineered way, but just looking to slightly readdress the formal kind of play equipment as it merges into the woods, just to cater for a wider range of children. But other than that, a good application overall.
Thank you very much. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's as usual on these. They're well thought out applications that we get on this particular site. I suppose there are two comments. One is, as I asked the question, this is the third time you've had a go at this. Are you likely to start? Or what's the likelihood of you starting? And the second point is, I'm going to take the opposite view to Councillor Ray in relation to play areas. Actually, wearing my old teacher's hat, I think informal or less formalised play areas, natural play areas, are much better for children because it allows them to use their imagination. That said, that's the diametrically opposed view, and I'll let you adjudicate on that, Chair.
I would find adjudicating on that extremely difficult, because I am of the very strong view that there's a good, very strong educational reason for having not necessarily natural areas, which I love, but certainly play areas that give open-ended opportunities, which the formal play areas don't. We could go on that debate forever. I think that's something that eventually will have to be settled outside panel. It is a practical matter, and we'll need to decide which way the developers are going. The next one on my list is Councillor Finnegan.
Thanks, Chair. I'm unconvinced with this particular application. I've heard a lot of waffle about car parking. I don't believe a word of it. I don't believe it is policy compliant. I see very little other than the aspirational about EN1 and EN2. There are no hard details or hard facts that convince me that it does comply with those. And I'm entirely and utterly unconvinced that 80 one-bedroom flats does anything towards a cohesive neighbourhood. It encourages a transitory population and all the problems and difficulties that creates. So I won't be supporting this application. Thank you.
Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a lot good about this application. I'm particularly pleased about the balconies, because I think it's been shown over the course of the pandemic that when you do live in a flat, you do need that extra bit of amenity space. And I think with regards again to this play area, if you've got just beyond the development, you've got woods, then having a safe play area for resident kids to go to and start to develop their independence, and the parents know that they're safe while going there, I think that's also very good for development. And I'm thinking of my own upbringing in Nottinghamshire, when I was like 8-9 years old and was allowed to go to the playground on my own, because it was quite a safe area, and I want that for other kids as well growing up. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. I would like to just say, with regards to the debacle earlier with the layout, I don't think that it's entirely right to say that plans panel members will be confused by too many blueprints, and especially not when you're trying to compare like for like. So I would like that to be taken forward in future, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Brooks. I think those are our old hands, Andy, that we've got up at the moment. Are there any further comments anybody would like to make? Is that your hand again, Councillor Finnegan? Or is it your old hand? He's taking it off, I think.
Apologies, Chair, I'll remove it.
Okay. My own view about this is that there was permission given for a very, very similar scheme. And I did feel it was significant enough in the city for this to come back, even though it was for relatively slight alterations from what's already been approved. So that's why it was in front of you. But I would like David to just remind us what reserved matters approval is actually placing in front of us for approval. Could you do that for us, David, please?
Yes, Chair. So with the outline having established the principle and the parameters of the planning permission, the outline planning permission, the reserved matters simply deals with the siting of the buildings, the design and the design of the development, the external appearance of the buildings, i.e. the way it looks, and the landscaping, the treatment of the land, as it were, of this particular site. So they're the matters which are before members: siting, design, external appearance, and landscaping.
Okay, so with those matters in mind, do I have a proposer for the recommendation, please?
Yes, I'll propose it.
And I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reagan and Councillor Ray. I will now take the vote. So again, afraid it means we have to go through everybody's name in alphabetical order. Could you indicate, please, whether you are supporting, against, or abstaining, please? Councillor Anderson.
Supporting.
Councillor Brooks.
Supporting.
Councillor Campbell.
Support.
Councillor Finnegan.
Against.
Councillor Hamilton.
Support.
Councillor Heselwood.
Supporting.
Councillor Reagan.
Support.
Councillor Shemilt.
Support.
Councillor Ray.
Support.
And I support too. So if you could just formally announce that result, Andy, for us, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. 9 members voted in favour of the recommendation and 1 against.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So we can move on to the next item. So we've been going a couple of hours or so. Would people like a 5-minute break? Yeah, thumbs up. So could you just take 5 minutes comfort break and come straight back? Thank you very much for your contribution to that item.
Councillor Gruen, can you hear me?
I can when I unmute myself. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Good. Thank you. I just wanted to just double check. Do you want me to pick up that mention of Sugar Hill Close?
Oh yes, I've forgotten about that. Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Shall I do it at the end of the meeting?
I
can do
think. Why don't we do it now when people aren't sort of shuffling about getting ready to leave? I know.
Okay.
Getting to leave remotely, of course, but you
Yeah.
know what I mean. We'll
Yeah.
start the second half with it. That's a good idea.
Okay. All right. Fine. Okay. Cheers.
It feels like a long 5 minutes, this. Should we be getting started, Andy?
Yeah, I think everybody's back in the meeting now, Chair.
Lovely. Let's have a go at it then. Splendid. David, I'm not sure that we actually had a summing up from you on the last one. Do you want to do that for the sake of completeness? And then I know that you want to make an announcement about Sugar Hill.
Okay, yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just to confirm then that members resolved to grant reserved matters approval for the development of Kirkstall Forge. That was subject to the conditions set out on page 9, with an additional condition attached to deal with the travel plan, provision of a travel plan with reference to the parking strategy plan, and that was passed as a vote of 9-1. Just with regard to the other matter, just before we go into the formal consideration of agenda item 8, members may already be aware, but I thought it'd probably be worth drawing your attention to this, that we've received the appeal decisions in respect, or we've received appeal decisions in respect of the proposed development at Sugar Hill Close. I'm sure members will remember that this was a very sensitive development, very difficult case, very difficult for the local community. It was a proposal to demolish 70 houses and put up 70 houses, a further 70 houses in its place. So in some respects, a like-for-like replacement. The unusual characteristic of this particular development was that those houses were already occupied. So members, the local community obviously extremely concerned, and members resolved that planning permission should be refused. 2 grounds. One, in terms of the form of the development and inadequate amenity space with provision with specific regard to some of the garden sizes. But the primary ground was on the impact that the development would have on the local community, and as a result of the development, that the local community would be dissipated. In the build-up to the appeal, the appellant submitted a revised plan which overcame or dealt with the issue of the garden spaces and the deficiencies there. So that revised plan meant that reason for refusal fell. But the appeal was still fought on the issue of the dissipation of the community and the harmful effects that the development would have on the community. I should say what we will do is we'll bring a full report to members with copies of the appeal decisions attached, and that will probably be presented to the next plans panel. But I thought it was worthwhile just giving you the headlines. So there were 2 decisions. The first decision from the inspector related to the planning appeal itself, and that was allowed. So planning permission was granted for that development. The second decision related to an application that the appellant made against the council, and that was an application for an award of costs against the council. The appellant basically made a case that the council behaved unreasonably in refusing planning permission, and that we had failed to substantiate our reasons for refusal at the appeal. The inspector dismissed that application for the award of costs, so that wasn't granted. So just concentrating on the planning appeal, the inspector recognised the point and acknowledged the point that members raised about the impact on the local community, accepted that was a material consideration, and also accepted that the development would have harmful effects. The inspector also came to the view that there would be some harm through the loss of the existing housing. Members may recall it's area housing, very local, distinct character. It's former National Union mine workers housing, and it does have some historic value. In that sense, the inspector came to the view that at the end, well, yes, it would result in the loss of this heritage asset, as it were, non-designated heritage asset, to use the planning phrase, but that was offset by the fact that the houses were considered to be of poor structural condition, that if they were to be refurbished, the amount of refurbishment works that would have to take place would inevitably harm the character of those houses. So that would damage the heritage asset in itself. But the inspector came to the conclusion, on the basis of the evidence that was provided, that the demolition of the houses due to their poor condition was justified. And that also not only diminished the heritage argument, as it were, but it also served to give weight to the inspector to grant planning permission for the development. The inspector reached the view that in all other respects, the development complied with our planning policies. So the inspector came to the view, when you look at the range of policies that we have as a whole, as set out in the development plan, that the proposal complied with those planning policies. So in light of all of that, the inspector allowed the appeal. A couple of points to note in terms of the dissipation of the community. The scheme will deliver 11 affordable units, and those residents who are on regulated assured or assured tenancies, which I believe is 11 households, will also be rehoused within the development. So with the 11 affordable units, our housing team section are looking at a local lettings policy with a view to rehousing as many of the residents, the existing residents within those affordable units. So that's something which is under consideration and under negotiation, and a further 11 households in terms of regulated and assured tenants will be rehoused as part of any redevelopment that takes place. I should also mention this is outside of the world of planning, as it were, but members should be aware that there are high-level discussions already taking place between the council and the residents, and between the council and the developers, looking to see if there are other things that the council can do to help safeguard at least some of the local community in terms of seeing if alternative provision on the site can be acquired and provided for them. So that's a discussion which is ongoing. But as I say, all I want to do is just draw your attention to the fact that decisions come through, give you the headlines of those decisions, and what we'll do is we'll bring a fuller report to probably the next plans panel for members' consideration and information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, David. It without doubt is one of the most difficult planning applications I think this panel has dealt with, certainly in the time that I've been a councillor. It was extremely demanding. I don't want to put you on the spot, Nicole, but is there anything you would wish to add to what David has said?
Not in relation to that appeal decision, Chair, but I could update in relation to the Benyon House court decision if you would like me to.
I would like you to, please, Nicole. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So members may be aware that or you will recall that in 2019 you granted permission for an out of town centre retail scheme on the former site of Benyon House in Middleton. And that was in relation to an A1 retail unit, primarily, I think it was a little unit, and it was going to be or will be situated next to an Asda store. So that permission was granted by panel against officer recommendations, and it was brought. It was a subject to a challenge by judicial review by Asda, and that was heard in the High Court in December 2019, where the court found in favour of the council. But then Asda was granted permission to appeal to the Court of Appeal, and that was heard just before Christmas. And the decision was handed down just last week, in that the Court of Appeal again found in favour of the council. So the general crux of the challenge was that Asda were of the view that paragraph 90 of the MPPF, which states that if a sequential test regarding retail impact assessment is not met, or if it finds that it's likely to have a significant impact on the retail centre, then it says the that planning permission should be refused. Now, Asda's case were that meant it should automatically be refused without any other balancing exercise whatsoever, and it was a mandatory requirement of the MPPF. They also were of the view that members were either misunderstood about how they understood that paragraph within the MPPF, or they were misdirected by their officers. But the High Court and the Court of Appeal after that were very clear that the whole set of circumstances about paragraph 90 was very clearly put before members, especially in the specific wording of the reports that were put before you, that you absolutely understood the meaning of what that meant, and that you were properly directed in legal advice with regard to what that meant in your decision making, your ability to make decisions and balance a case against other material considerations. So they were really clear by reference to what was said by yourselves as panel, and that it was absolutely appropriate for you to place more weight on matters such as economic regeneration and more jobs, which is the greater weight that you put on that matter than what you did on the harm that was said to be found on the district centre. So all in all, everything was done correctly. We were found to be legally correct, but the court did specifically refer to the way that the reports were written, how members were given the right information, expressly pulled out word for word from the policy, so that there could be absolutely no misunderstanding by you as to what was expected of you or what you were being required to weigh up in the different considerations. And that was also referred to very clearly in the minutes as to why you felt what other factors took greater weight or were given greater weight than those NPPF policies. So good, it was good news. So the plan of permission still stands, and the council will recover all its costs in defending those challenges from Asda.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, panel, for such sound decision making and such careful consideration, because that was another one that was both controversial and difficult, and with a good outcome for us in the end. So thank you, and thanks for the succinctness and accuracy of that report, Nicole, much appreciated. Okay, so that will now take us on to agenda item 8, which is the application for 11 houses and 4 bungalows with staff facilities and staff accommodation off Cockshot Lane in Armley. Richard, this is you again, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I could just start off by introducing, we also have on the presentation this afternoon, we've got Richard Marsh, who's the Senior Nature Conservation Officer at the Council. He will be here to answer any questions, etc., as will also Seamus Core, who's the Principal Landscape Officer. So particularly any questions around biodiversity, nature conservation to Richard, and Seamus on obviously landscape and tree protection issues. So, Chair, this presentation is to provide a position statement updating the panel of the application proposed, which is a hybrid model of development split between 11 private dwellings and a supported living scheme, which is made up of 1 block, namely 13 apartments, 1-bed apartments, and 1 staff accommodation unit, and a further separate block of 4 bungalows. Alongside this, which contains new road infrastructure, would be the creation of a new landscaped area of the existing green space that is set towards the bottom third of the site, as to be shown in the following slides. Next slide, please, Toby. So the site here in red is just shy of 1 hectare. It's set on a cleared land, cleared piece of land, a site with an established residential urban community within Armley, and not too far from the A647 Stanley Road. You can see there it within the slide. The site was historically home to a large detached 1930s public house named Wither Park Hotel, but more latterly the Yorkshireman, until its demolition in 2004. Behind the public house was a bowling green present till around about the 1940s, 50s. To aid members visually and with the orientation, which, as the slides will show, has become somewhat overgrown with self-seeded vegetation over the years, I draw your attention to the electricity pylon and the line of the overhead cables. This is set in the bottom third of the site, which is the green space area I will refer to. Next slide, please, Toby. This slide shows the site clearer within the context of the surrounding community. Cockshot Lane is to the northwest boundary and forms the principal access point into the site, both historically and as proposed. Going clockwise around the site is the Wither Park Post Office and the General Convenience Store. Gotts Park Avenue is a run of mainly semi-detached red brick properties dating from the 1940s, 50s, back onto the site. To the southeast side of the site is Armley Ridge Road allotments. To the south and the southwest of the site is Cockshot Drive, a cul-de-sac of 1950s, 60s houses. There is an access between the two of them into the site, and that's between houses number 23 and 25 that allow primarily for pedestrian access into the allocated green space area, which, as I've mentioned, has become overgrown and underused in recent times. Next slide, please, Toby. This aerial shows the context as found generally, which is reflective of today. The more open area where the bowling green lays is seen fairly central within the site, and some trees that remain, particularly around the perimeter of this area, benefit from a tree preservation order made in 1994. Next slide, please. This is a 3D aerial view. Note the electricity pylon again for orientation purposes, roughly around in the center of the screen, and hopefully you can just pick out where that's positioned relative to the boundaries of the properties on Cockshot Drive that back onto that. Next slide, please. This slide shows the site circa 1933 with a public house and the bowling green evident. You can also see an annotation EP, which is likely to be the reference to the early electricity pylon or the base intended for it. Next slide, please. This slide is a 1932 image of the public house that's now been demolished. Note the design of the gable fronted projections and the materials, which are brick at ground floor level with a pebble dash style render above at first floor level. Next slide, please. This slide is typical of the period from the 1960s to 1980s when the bottom third of the site, which is now the designated green space area, was used for garages, stroke parking as accessed from Cockshot Drive. Next slide, please. This map here shows the public right-of-way route, which is a claimed footpath, not a definitive one, but a claimed one, dashed in green, which runs from Cockshot Lane down to Armley Ridge Road. And there are forks that come off that towards Cockshot Drive at the 2 points between 23 and 25 that are referred to, and another to the head of the cul-de-sac, Cockshot Drive. However, this particular latter route appears to have been blocked, fenced off in more recent times at the resident gardens. Next slide, please. This image shows the existing tree stock in pale green on the site with their RPA boundaries coloured indicated within the green areas. Next slide, please. The next few photos date from May 2019 and do reflect the fact that the application has been in for some time now, and officers are keen that we can try and bring this to a conclusion. Photo one is one that shows the site looking south towards the front area of the site on Cockshot Lane. This is flanked by the post office and the convenience store on the left-hand side, and there are some further small commercial shops just coming into shot at the foreground there, which is on the right-hand side of the site. Next slide, please. This photo shows the frontage of the site facing Cockshot Lane. The bus stop immediately fronting the site access would be resited and moved as part of the development. Next slide, please. This photo shows the typical level of overgrowth. You've obviously got some Harris-style fencing that's been erected to try and prevent further unauthorised access and fly tipping. situation which has continued and has actually increased in recent times, particularly during the pandemic, and something which residents tell us is a constant problem, as do ward members. Next slide, please. This is the view from Wither Park Road, opposite the site, broadly looking east into it. The electricity pylon you can see in the background. You also can see there TPO tree T10, which is a hybrid black poplar. It's just shown to the left-hand side of the access that's become redundant on the site. You can just see it in between the two cars there. Next slide, please. This slide shows a closer position of that previous photo, showing the site at the top north corner, where the public right-of-way, which is set in between these two trees, is meant to follow. Obviously somewhat overgrown and underused in recent times, but there is a right-of-way that runs between those two trees down the perimeter of the site. Next slide, please. This photo shows the site viewed from the opposite end of Cockshot Lane, looking northeast. This is the likely original public house side brick boundary wall. We think we can see there, just in the right of the hand side of Cockshot Lane. There you can see also the telephone box just beside it, and that runs to the edge of the site and to the corner. Next slide, please. Looking over that particular wall within the site, this is typical of the site, and it shows the relationship with the adjacent commercial premises. This particular one that you can see on the right is a hot food takeaway. Next slide, please. This is the access into that green space area I was talking about earlier, the bottom third of the site. So this photo is taken between 23 and 25 Cockshot Drive. As mentioned, it's primarily a pedestrian route, but obviously there has been vehicle access historically with the garages. And as you can see, there's a resident car there parked at present. Next slide, please. Beyond that access into the green space area, this photo shows the typical condition of the land currently found and some evidence of residential incursions into the area over time. There is TPO tree group G3, particularly a hybrid black poplar, again shown there in the photo as well. Next slide, please. This photo is broadly looking west towards Cockshot Lane from the green space area, and again shows the general state of overgrowth. Next slide, please. This photo looks in the opposite direction this time, towards the east. Again, you can see the electricity pylon there in focus. Next slide, please. Again, looking east within the area of green space. This is the bottom third of the site, towards the dwellings at the head of Cockshot Drive. The claimed public right-of-way that I referred to earlier, the fork that is meant to exit between these two dwellings, has become obstructed and lost over the years, but clearly there was once a right-of-way through that area. Next slide, please. This photo is more recent, from November 2020, and shows the area of green space to the rear of 2527 Cockshot Lane, as you can see in the right of the photo. The primarily pedestrian access road is also coming into view on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. This is a photo showing properties on Gotts Park Avenue on the other side of the site boundary, and shows the typical relationship of the site beyond the rear gardens of these semi-detached properties. Electricity pylon again in the background. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, thanks, Toby. This slide shows the extent of the site in the top left corner, the red line. To the top right, you've got an image that shows the white area of what we call the developable land, which is the unallocated land, and that's the focus of the residential development before us today. The green space is also shown in that green area, with the blue hatching showing the cable and the pylon position. That has an overhead cable 10-metre safety zone in hatched blue running through it to obviously maintain safe distances from any development. Next slide, please. This slide shows a new access road created, set in the optimum position with respect to sight lines onto Cockshot Lane. It also shows the 11 private dwellings, 6 of which would front Cockshot Lane itself, and a further 5 set facing each other in the middle of the development. The access road would be a 20-mile-per-hour zone designed to slow speeds with its geometry in the corners and the table ramps. To the right-hand side is the supported living element made up of the 2-storey apartment block housing 13 one-bed flats with 1 unit of staff warden accommodation, and also the block of 4 bungalows, all built to accessible standards. Next slide, please. This slide shows the 3-bed dwellings, the same house type throughout the scheme. The design externally reflects elements of the original public house that we saw earlier, namely with the gable projections and the materials of brick and render in particular. Contextually, that would relate well within the existing street scene too. It's the existing 2-storey housing stock that you find on Cockshot Lane around the site, very similar in design and character. Next slide, please. This slide shows the supported living element, which would provide accessible housing for adults who would be as independent as possible, but still require an element of on-site care. This would allow lift access between the 2 floors. The accommodation here is additional communal areas for small group settings to foster well-being and support for one another with specialist professional care. The applicant would build the scheme alongside the private houses, but the accommodation would be managed by a provider of the residential care specialist supported living group. The incoming residents would be supported, to the supported living would generally probably be likely to have learning disabilities and such like. They have a range of additional needs as such as physical, sensory impairment, autism spectrum disorders, just to name some of those typical characteristics. SSL, Special Supported Living as I'll refer to them, would expect to take the residents working alongside well-established and recognised key partners in the sector. This is expected to be a registered provider, such as Blue Square Housing Association, a not-for-profit social landlord, and specialist in supported living. Additionally, Eden Futures, a specialist provider of care services, would be involved, as they have been on another recently approved supported living scheme that we've been dealing with in Stanley. Representatives of both the construction company as applicant and SSL are hopefully going to be available for questions and commentary today should you wish to ask anything further about how that relationship would work. This includes the planning agent and the architect too. Next slide, please. This slide shows the supported living bungalows with the further communal space providing additional and varied accommodation, which is often advised and preferred and required by the NHS Commissioner. Next slide, please. This slide shows some sections of the site taken in 2 directions. The top BB is looking southeast from Cockshot Lane with the post office and the convenience store on the left, and further commercial properties, including the hot food takeaway on the right. The bottom section, AA, is taken looking northeast from within the site. The new dwellings to the left are fronting Cockshot Lane, and the further pair of private dwellings are shown in the middle of the site. The apartments, the supported living scheme, is shown on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. This slide shows the position of the development with the trees and their RPAs, their root protection areas, plotted. This is a difficult site to develop, I think it's fair to say, first of all, without some impact on existing tree stock, which is scattered to a certain extent, and that's mainly due to the history of the site. The trees to be lost, with the exception of TPO tree T3, are all category C trees. That said, it's hoped that TPO tree T6 can also be retained, which would require some further amendments and changes to this layout, possibly which could involve moving further or handing the bungalows and the 3 dwellings. The arboricultural impact assessment that we've got here in front of us has come quite late in the day, and obviously this is why it's a position statement, and we've only received this at the start of the week. But hopefully it will allow for us to continue the dialogue of protecting that tree T6, which is very much in the applicant's desires as well as our own. Notwithstanding any tree loss on the site, on the wider site, is regrettable, and replacement tree stock, including a number of heavy-duty trees, has been designed into the site, both adjacent to the access road as you come in, but also primarily into the green space area, which particularly we want to try and focus on in further discussions, and also as part of the position statement discussed today. Next slide, please. This slide here shows a development along the re-landscaped green space area and the new tree stock. Just to give some context to that green space area, it's always been an allocated piece of green space within the unitary development plan and site allocations plan. But certainly it's obviously been in private use, and the applicant, who's only acquired the site in more recent years, has obviously taken it on as found. It's previously, over the years, decades even, been fairly unmanaged. Obviously is certainly accessible to a certain extent, but it also has become overgrown. And I would just reiterate that what we're trying to do with this plan here is to, really reinvigorate that area and provide better accessible opportunities for all. So it's considered, with some further improvements, changes to this plan, we can make we can better align the surfacing and the treatment of the public rights of way that do exist through the green space area and also towards Cockshot Drive. This could be a combination of surfacing and better waymarking. Additional tree planting within the area outside of the overhead cable zone is also considered will improve the tree stock locally and increase biodiversity. This could be done to further redirect some of the biodiversity net gain requirements lost from the top 2/3 of the site, which all parties recognise, both the applicant and the local authority. And as part of our biodiversity net gain requirements, we've calculated that there is a figure of 3.13 units required to be offset, which would produce a total of £75,120 for biodiversity offsetting elsewhere to be provided within the Armoury Ward, and this would be secured as part of the Section 106 agreement. We have got an update also as part of the an energy statement, or an emerging energy statement, and the biodiversity metric in further details if required. I can quickly just run over, if you don't mind, Chair, on the energy statement, the detailed bullet points of which are as follows. So the applicants, the architects, have set out the following initial commentary around the concept of positively addressing core strategies, policies EN1, EN2 and EN4. The development will be built using a light gauge metal frame system, which is a highly insulated modern method of construction, built to exceed the current building regulations, highly insulated with a very low air leakage, heated using high efficiency condensing combination gas boilers. High performance windows and doors will be used throughout. Sanitary ware will have a low water usage with aerated taps used throughout. Water usage will be less than 125 litres per person per day. Where appliances are supplied, they will be A+ rated for power water usage. The site is located in a primary residential area. All construction materials will be locally sourced wherever possible. All timber will be sustainably sourced wherever possible. All contractors and tradesmen will be based locally where possible. So the sum total of the above points will create hopefully a very efficient building with a low carbon footprint, responsibly built using modern construction methods in a sustainable location. And Chair, we're confident we can obviously provide further details as part of a condition discharge to zoom in on that detail as we do on a lot of major applications. So this is the current position statement, Chair, and it is a position statement. The members' views on the development as emerging and comments on the questions within the report are welcome. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. And as you've just reminded us, this is a position statement, so we're not making decisions about this today. We do have speakers, but before I bring them in, are there any questions to officers from panel members, please? Councillor Finnegan and then Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Chair. While accepting it's a position statement, we're not making any decisions today. Can we, when we get to EN1 and EN2, can we have specifics? Because we've banged on about this panel after panel after panel, and what we get is vague aspiration, or we'll deal with it in condition. I'd like to see the fundamentals at this point. It's a great scheme. I've no real problems with it at this stage, but I want to make sure that we have specific detail rather than sort of vague offers. Thanks, Chair.
You're talking, Councillor Finnegan, about when it comes back to us, you want to see that?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question about the footpaths? Because there was some discussion about that, and I'm actually looking on the Leeds definitive footpath map, which shows the footpath that runs down the side of the development as a claimed footpath, not an actual footpath. And there are two other claimed footpaths across the site. Would it be the intention of the council stroke developer to apply for those to be included in the definitive footpath map? Because I understand that you can actually request that. It sort of shortcuts the process slightly if you request that as part of the planning application.
I can answer a little bit on that before I introduce the applicant agent, Chair, if you wish.
Yes, thank you, Richard.
Okay, so yes, Toby, I think if you could perhaps bring up slide 47, perhaps, which shows the public rights of way map. That's it, great, thanks. So yeah, we discussed this in a fair bit of detail with Angela Cookland in the public rights of way team, and her view, you're quite right, Councillor, it is certainly a claims route, but it has been an established route. It's just that along with the site, it's become overgrown and underused, and so part of the scheme would be to resurface and reintroduce a clear route, certainly from Cockshot Lane down to Harmony Ridge Road, or certainly to the boundary of the site anyway. And hopefully that would be better used in the future through the fact that it would be resurfaced, and obviously, the overgrowth, would be removed. Clearly, one of the forks that come off that principal route between the two properties at the head of the cul-de-sac has been lost over time. Speaking with Angela Cookland, the view is that it does seem, looking at imagery that we've got, it does seem to have been screened, blocked off for a number of years. And her view is that as long as we maintain that more important route between number 23 and 25, the slightly longer of the two forks, she's happy that the scheme doesn't necessarily need to recreate that route into what would be effectively, a screened area. Yes, the applicants could answer the question whether they could apply for a definitive order, but the intention is to certainly resurface and provide better wayfinding that would really reintroduce those paths for the benefit of all the community. And we think that certainly the 2 out of the 3 are the key ones to make sure that provides permeability between certainly Cockshot Lane and Stanley Road. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Chair.
Yep. Councillor Hamilton, please.
Yes, Chair. My question is regards to the number of trees, because all I've read is that some trees are TPO'd. How many would be removed?
Richard.
TPO'd, and how many to be removed?
So this is a major issue about the application that we've spent a lot of time pondering. Is Seamus with us, Richard, or does he have to be messaged to join us?
Seamus should be now with us. Hopefully he can introduce himself.
Seamus, would you like to answer that question or at least address it for us?
Yes, good afternoon, Chair. Thank you. It's only specific trees that are covered by a TPO, bearing in mind that it was made some 26 years ago. So although the site is covered with trees now, they've grown up since the TPO was initially made. As I understand it, obviously the older trees on site are the ones that would be the original TPO, and those are the ones I think that have been captured there on that previous slide that showed the existing trees that was done as a tree survey. So it's only those trees that are actually covered with the TPO. So most of those would unfortunately be lost with this layout. That's the situation. Hope that helps.
Chair, I can also add to that if you wish.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah. So I've got the details of the 1994 TPO. I can just try and share the screen and show that for the members' benefit. Hopefully, is that coming through now?
It is, yes, we can see it.
Yeah. So it's fair to say the site obviously has become very overgrown. So it's really difficult to, excuse the pun, see the wood from the trees, or the other way around. But essentially, you've got a number of trees scattered, particularly sort of more where behind the original public house. There is a couple, T1 and T2, that we believe over the years, certainly before the applicant's taken on this site, have been lost. No one's quite sure what's happened to them, but obviously the survey does date back a number of years. You've also got some other trees, which is difficult to accurately predict if the sightings that you can see on that map there is fairly reflective of the site. But you can see reference to T3, which is certainly where you've got a hybrid black poplar and a sycamore in close proximity to one another. They still exist. The groups G1 and G2 have kind of become a bit merged with the overgrowth, so very difficult to see in reality from the aerials and so on. The key trees, particularly from the TPO point of view, we feel are T5, T6 and G3, the group more towards the south boundary or south corner, southwest boundary. They're particularly good quality, good stock, good presence. They still exist very much so, as does T4. But certainly that's the order, and it's very difficult to really pinpoint exactly, on the site exactly how many are being lost, just purely because of the overgrowth. But we think round about 5 to 7 trees would be lost.
Thank you for that. Would you like to come back, Councillor Hamilton? You may be on mute.
No, Chair, that's fine.
Okay. There is one tree, Seamus, isn't there, that will be very near the current planned layout, and you've been looking as to how that could be preserved. Do you want to say a word or two about that now, as we're on trees?
Yes, Chair. That's the T6, which is on the southern boundary there, which again is a native black poplar, and it's been categorized as a high B category, which means it's fairly good condition, a healthy tree, which has got some future to it in terms of years. This is by the independent tree survey that's been submitted. So it's good for another 20, 30 years minimum in terms of lifespan of the tree. Unfortunately, it is tricky with the current layout. Yes, that one there at the very bottom, which is, I don't know if you can see, it's blue, a blue ring.
Yes, we can see that, Seamus.
Down to the bottom there, I don't know where the pointer is, but blue is in the British Standard means category B, and the others, you can see there's a few category B trees scattered about, but the grey ones are category C, which are still viable trees, but not of any special quality. The trouble with that is whatever you do with this layout, you're going to be very close to that tree. If you could physically avoid damaging it, by the construction of the development. You've still got the problem of proximity, and you know, if the tree's going to grow for another 20 or 30 years, then it needs the space in which to do that without conflicting and compromising the residential units. So you see with that layout there, you can see in that bottom plan, it's shown for removal, and in all honesty, with that proximity of development there, the root protection areas aren't shown there, but of course a lot of that would be underneath the building anyway. So if that tree was to be retained safely and sustainably, it would need a lot more space around it to allow for the future and shading and all the rest. So there could be some manipulation of the site layout to create that by maybe swapping around those two bottom dwellings there, for example. And these are judgments now to be weighed up in the mix, or whether that achieving this layout is more important and that we can get mitigation somewhere else. That's what has to be played with now at the moment. Does that help?
Yes, it does. It sets the context very nicely. Thank you very much. I've seen Councillor Brooks, and I think Colin's hand is an old hand, unless I'm mistaken.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm looking at slide 64, as given to us in the packs. Just so everyone's on the same page, as it were. So T3, the root protection is shown shaded, but then in the area of the root protection, there's a car parking space, and it looks to me as though the car parking will go right up to the very edge of the trunk there. So that's a concern. On a previous slide as well, that was showing the TPOs from the 1990s. It seems to me that T1 and T2 are shown on those TPO plans. They seem to correlate with those plans. So, and yet they're shown as trees to be removed here. I think in terms of like concerns, I think that's what I've got written down so far. So if you'd like to go into that a little bit, that'd be helpful.
Seamus, have you got those queries?
I think it was teeth. Basically, there's no trees that would be retained, TPO or otherwise, except the only chance we have is with that lower, bottom right corner where there's G3, T6, and T5. The rest of the trees there, T3 and T4, quite rightly, a proximity to development. That's more like it there. That's really the trees in red there will all be lost, obviously, to development, and the other ones are being built on. The building is too close to these trees. There's no way they can, and car parking, as the councillor rightly pointed out, there would be on top of these trees, and there's no way they could survive this development. But there is some hope for that bottom right hand corner, where you've got some, you've got, is it T5, 6, and that group of G3 run down there. So there's some chance that they could be retained, but yes, the others will be gone. That's not to mention all the natural regeneration that's taken place on the site. So we're only talking about TPOs here. The other material will, of course, be lost as well, but that there will be accounted for in terms of the biodiversity calculations for the site.
So is that clear, Councillor Brooks? Everything with a red circle would have to be lost.
Yeah, that's clear. I suppose the most obvious next question then is, can the site be rejigged to save them?
I wouldn't say with the current density. I don't think there's any chance of saving most of those. No, they would have to stay red. The only one is that in the bottom right hand corner there, T6. There's a possibility that could be retained with some adjustments. But to really save any more than this, we're talking about reducing the density of the scheme to accommodate retention of trees. It just wouldn't be feasible with tinkering around the numbers that we've got here. I don't think that could be achieved.
Could you just talk us through, and I will come to the speakers in a moment, but we're still on questions and they're quite valid questions. Could you just talk us through the plans again for that piece of green space that is going to be retained, which will have substantial planting put on it? Is that Seamus or Richard?
I can do that, Chair. That's
Thank
fine.
you.
Yeah. Just quickly on the previous point. Yeah, the trees T1 and T2 seem to have been lost over the years. They were a silver birch and a rowan, quite small in size, but certainly the tree survey hasn't picked up on them. And we're not quite sure what's happened to them, but they seem to have been lost for a number of years when we looked at historical mapping, photos, etc. But the trees that do remain, yes, you're right. We try to retain tree free if we could, where that parking court is. I don't know, Toby, if you could bring up slide 69 again, if you don't mind. Thanks. So yeah, T3, where the parking court is, in between the apartments and the two semi-detached dwellings. The intention is was to try and keep that particular tree, small sycamore, but I think in reality it's going to be impossible. So we try to be honest, with what trees do need to come out, and certainly, as you can see in that middle part of the site, whether it's the trees that have been previously lost, T1, T2 of the previous TPO, or T10, T3, it's very difficult to develop any meaningful site without having some sort of impact. So that's why in the landscape plan, if Toby, you can go to the next slide, we've tried to maximize replanting. Although you can see in that landscaped area of the green space, we've got some feathered type trees shown. We want to continue discussions with the applicants about getting some more heavy duty trees in that area. Obviously not within the 10-meter electrical cable zone, but certainly some, there's scope to put some more trees within that particular green space area, as well as obviously what you can see there on that landscape scheme with all the new tree planting that you can see in the sort of slightly darker, bolder black circular lines, particularly around the access road and at the front of the development. And so, yes, density wise, we could reduce the density further. I mean, we've tried to strike a balance between, achieving something that hopefully retains the best of the trees on site, but has a meaningful layout that works for highways, as well as obviously relationship to neighbours. And then we have obviously lost some trees. It's always a regret, but we have got the green space and this space around the site to put some decent planting in, and hopefully that's what that plan shows, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hamilton, is your hand up for the second time, or have you left it up?
It's the second time. No, I just
Okay.
wanted to go back to ask Seamus with regards to the trees that are going to be retained. I know you mentioned about looking at reorientating the building, etc. But these roots are going to continue growing, aren't they? And then they're going to end up having subsidence to the building, or, well, the car park is a car park. So, but sorry about that. I don't know why that come on. Yeah, so just asking, these trees, the roots are going to continue, aren't they? And then there's going to be subsidence. I just wanted to know if they're going to continue growing, because keeping them there near the houses is going to cause some issues.
Seamus, can you answer that one?
Yes, Chair, thank you. Yeah, so that's a very comment there. And normally what I would say is this, that subsidence caused by trees is a bit of a myth in lots of respects. It only ever applies if you've got what you call shrinkable clay. So if you imagine the clay, the ground that supports the foundation of a house, if it dries out and shrinks, it creates a gap between the foundation of a building and the bed that it sits on, if you can imagine that. And therefore the foundations would sink and cause cracks. And that's what the subsidence, a brief description of what it is. Now, in Leeds, there is virtually no shrinkable clay in Leeds. It doesn't really exist except in some very small pockets. So it's highly unlikely, unless somebody unless there's test pigs to prove it, that this is an exception, and that there's clay that's shrinkable, not just clay, but it's a particular type. Then this type of threat undermining buildings would not exist. But having said that, the species of tree we're talking about here is a well-known water-demanding tree, high-demanding tree, and it can dry out soil and impact on gardens and everything, because it will dry up the ground around it. Now, modern buildings, there's plenty of guidance on foundations with proximity to trees, and any architect, engineer would be paying attention to those and always analysing proximity to trees, or even trees that are to be planted, and make the foundations accordingly. So there's never any chance of buildings subsiding due to water loss in the soil. But you're quite right, these trees, as I mentioned earlier, are good for another 30 years plus, possibly. And they are going to grow, and the root systems are going to grow. And that's why I'm saying that it's challenging with the current density to retain those trees even down the corner, due to the space that you ought to leave around trees of this nature as a good practice. And poplars being one of the more challenging, and it can be quite a big tree, and all the shading and root systems and everything else with close proximity is a bad idea. We're only storing up conflict for the future, even if we could physically fit it in now. So that's something that we really have to investigate more, whether this is going to be viable to do, or whether we should be looking for other types of mitigation or a combination. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Thank you, Seamus. That is helpful. Councillor Brooks.
Thanks, Chair. I've got one more question on trees, but then I've got additional questions on the development itself. So I'd just like to flag that up if you were wanting to move on after that. Yeah, what you mentioned feathered trees, but like I've got absolutely no idea what that means. Have you got some examples of what that is, and would they be sort of British trees to add to the biodiversity in the area?
Chair, yes, thank you, Chair. I can answer that. Yeah. So a feather tree is basically a bit of a whip, and you might say, what's a whip? But it's a long stick type tree. It'd only be some millimeters wide. It's not a tree with a stake, with a clear stem and a canopy, a sort of parkland tree that you see everywhere. It's more of a lighter sort of stick with branches on it, and that's where the term feather comes from. And that's the difference between a whip and a feather. A whip is literally a long stick, which could be up to 1.5, 1.8 meters tall, but it's just a stick. And if you look at more forestry type planting, that's more the style of planting that's done, not your standard trees, if you like, with the manicured clear stem with a timber post and tie and a sort of very well trained canopy. They're much more informal type planting, lower budget planting, but have their benefits. But the disadvantage is, of course, they're very, very vulnerable in a public area and can be snapped and vandalized very, very easily. So, part of the discussion is trees like that wouldn't be appropriate in a situation like this, where we're encouraging public access. And there is public access, and it could be easily vandalized. So there's a lot of work to be done to come up with the green space design for that area. Has a long way to go. It is the bottom of the range at the moment, but I'm sure the applicant is willing to work and coming up with something a bit more meaningful than that. Also, we have to think about amenity space for the new residents. Is this going to play a part? I mean, it'd be a fantastic opportunity for them. Could they go for a walk in there, a circular walk? That type of thing, makes some use out of it for them as well. So it could, as well as accommodating the public rights of way, but these must be DDA compliant footpaths and not the type of path, a mud path that it wouldn't be appropriate in a situation like that. So there's a lot of work to do on that, but it's got some potential. It could even go as far as having a destination within it. But that needs discussion as well. And surveillance is an issue. And it would have been great if some of these dwellings could have faced onto it, because basically we're building more and more backyardings around this green space. And the sense of surveillance is not as strong. It'll be even less maybe in this development, which turns its back on it or turns its side on it. Maybe that could be changed, yeah.
Thank you, Seamus. That's helpful. Councillor Brooks, would the remainder of your questions benefit from the applicants' representatives being able to answer them as well? I'm suggesting that we have the speakers next and then you ask those questions.
Yeah, that's fine, Chair.
Okay, lovely. So we have with us, representing the applicant, Roger Lee, Chris Musson, Andy Brooke, Mick Dunbar, Keely Dunbar. You do have between you 4 minutes, speakers. Have you decided who's going to deliver the speaking? Richard, do we have the speakers with us?
Yeah, I think Roger's intimated that Roger Lee would do the speaking. So yeah.
Okay, Roger. That's fine then, Roger. So as just stated, you've got up to 4 minutes, and please start in your own time.
Thanks. I don't think I'll need 4 minutes, to be honest. I've been listening to what's being said. Richard has also summarised a lot of the things that we've discussed. We are on revision M on our layout now, so I think that is clear that we have been involved in quite a lot of discussion and amendments to this scheme to try and meet with issues that have been raised along the way. Obviously, the application has been in for a considerable amount of time as well. And that's how we've arrived at the layout we have done. And we are obviously trying to find a balance between delivering a development, both for private housing and also for the supported living housing, and retain the important elements of the environment and the trees as we see it. And I think as we've discussed with the officers at the council, and also providing a much more meaningful area of green space on the adjacent land that the applicant controls. And our position just on the trees is that we are intending and we do want to keep tree T6 and also T3. I think Richard's also pointed out, and that is correct, that some of the trees within the site have already been lost and were lost before the applicant purchase the land. That's T1 and T2. And we will look at amending the scheme further and how we can do that to keep T6. it is a bit of a balancing exercise on T6 because we did come under a lot of pressure in summer last year from an owner of an adjacent property immediately to the south, that she felt that the tree was in a dangerous condition. There'd been high winds over a weekend, there'd been a children's party, and there was concern about the possibility of that tree causing some damage and safety issues to that property. But we, like I say, we are keen to keep it anyway, and that's always been the position. And the view from our arboriculturist is that the tree is healthy and stable and capable of being retained. And we will also look at some more heavy duty planting instead of the feathered planting that's been discussed as well. And the aim being to try and come to an agreement as quickly as we can and deliver this development as quickly as we can.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll come back to Councillor Brooks' questions now about the development in general. Councillor Brooks.
Chair. Yeah, I'm pleased to see that there's social spaces in the building for older people, assisted living. But for the disabled people, there doesn't seem to be one. I was just wondering why that was.
Who would like to take that question?
I can start off, but obviously, Chair, we've got Chris Musson, who's probably best placed to answer any of the detailed in
Thank you.
terms of layout, design issues, etc. That's okay.
Yep, that's fine.
So, Toby, if you could possibly go to slide 66, if that's possible. That shows the apartment block. 66. Okay, so I mean, first and foremost, it's worth noting that all the units are designed to accessible standards, lifetime homes. You know, they're all, as you can see there on the plan, they're all designed with wheelchair access in mind. There's a lift between the 2 floors. That will mean that each resident has, you know, an accessible unit. And obviously the bungalows are designed with the same dimensions, configurations for wheelchair use. You do have an area on the apartments, you can see in the bottom left, that's a communal space. You know, yes, it's more of a sort of a large sort of entrance lobby area, but you know, it could be flexibly used, we feel. You've also got in the bungalows, you know, it's all part of one supported living development. You've also got a communal room there. So hopefully there's 2 opportunities for, you know, communal meeting areas, as well as obviously the external green space that it will look onto. And obviously there is some private amenity space as well around the perimeters of both the apartments and the bungalows. So I think there are opportunities. You probably noticed as well, there is some staff facilities, and Chris might be able to explain a bit more whether some of those staff facilities, particularly on the first floor, in the bottom left corner of the first floor, whether that room could be flexibly used for communal activity for residents. So I'll hand over to Chris, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. The apartments, just so you understand, they are for individuals who may or may not want to have some sort of communal space, may want to use it, may never use it. This is all for folk who may currently be in a registered setting, maybe some sort of a care home, who at the minute are being told or advised when they might be getting their cups of teas and their meals in the day into their own home, where they are doing what they would like when they would like. So it may be that they would use these communal areas, it may be that they wouldn't, it may be that they will have friends there, and like the rest of us, they would go into their friend's apartment to have a chat with them or watch the telly rather than a communal area. One of those is a communal area, the other area is a staff service area. Now, with regard to the bungalows, it's probably wrong for them to be assumed to be for older people. They will be for people who may have a physical disability, but also other challenging needs, you know, autism spectrum, learning disabilities, or whatever that might be, they are probably less likely to need communal space. They will have their own sort of outside areas on those bungalows. But yeah, they're not really targeted at an aged client group, if you like. It's more about who needs that sort of accommodation. I hope I've answered your question there, but I'm not sure that I have.
Thank you for doing so. Councillor Brooks, do you want to ask anything further on that?
Yeah, no, it's yeah, I was just a bit puzzled as to why there's that sort of, you know, like a common room. It's labelled on 67 as a common room, and then on, you know, it's just communal space, so it's not sort of equitable. And I was just wondering if there was a reason for that.
Oh, you mean the difference between that on the bungalows and that on the apartments?
Yes, I think that's what's being asked.
Okay. Right, the space on the bungalows is actually more likely to be for staff. It may well be in practice that people come from those bungalows and may go in there, but it might be more used for that individual to meet maybe someone from the local authority, maybe a social care professional or something like that, so they can have meetings outside of their own home, if you know what I mean. There is the one on the bungalows, it's not really a communal area. It's going to be, remember, it's only for 4 people as well. There's 4 bungalows, all single occupancy. So it may be used by those individuals, but it's an area that will be used for staff as well and for those sorts of meetings, so people don't have to have them in their own home. The communal area, again, in the apartments, it's there because people may want to see other people or other professionals or outside of their own home. It's, in many senses, a communal area for a supported living scheme are requested by their loved ones who think they're going to go from a registered support sometimes and then go into their own home, their own front door, and be very, very lonely. So they're put in as much to cater for that scenario as anything else. It's not a proven thing with supported living that those communal spaces always get used like they might do in an older person's setting. It's a piece of space which may be used, it may not be, but it's certainly not as key to a development as it would be, say, for an older person's home or older person's scheme of some nature. So they're not equitable, you're right, but they serve different purposes. They're not. Does that help?
Thank you for addressing that. I think we've probably gone as far as we can on that one. Right, can we take the slide down so that I can see people's hands, please? Thank you. Councillor Reagan.
Just to go further with that point, I know we've addressed that, but it's clear, isn't it? And during pandemic times, it's more about isolation of people with special needs and with the autistic spectrums, that we need to make sure that we have got spaces to deter isolation. And I would like to think that the developer is making provision for communal space so that we can have more activity between the residents in those blocks. So I would, you know, I think we need to make sure, or the developer needs to make sure that those spaces are available.
Very fair point, Denise. Thank you. We'll make a note of that. I can't see any more hands at the moment. So could I draw your attention to the bullet points on page 48 of your papers, please? And these are the areas that we are being requested to consider as part of this position statement. So the first one is, members are requested to consider whether the landscape plan as drafted is appropriate in its design and characteristics and suitable in the light of the above commentary. So we have discussed the trees, and we have discussed the adjacent green space and the additional planting. We've also discussed the fact that looking at different layouts for the development or making it less intensive may be kinder to the environment and enable saving more of the trees. So those are the issues that have cropped up in the discussion. Could I have any views that people want to express on that? Councillor Reagan, have you put your hand up again, or is that a historic hand?
It's an historic hand, Chair, sorry.
Councillor Campbell.
No, I agree with what you've support what you've said, Chair. I just wanted to make a point on bullet point 4 when we get there.
Okay, fine. Any more points on the first bullet point? So are we saying that we would still like the developer to consider a reconfiguration of the layout and consider if they could save more trees, and that we would want substantial further planting in the green space part? Are people happy with that gist?
Yes, yes.
Okay, move on to the next one. So subject to further verbal information for the conclusions of the agricultural impact assessment being presented at panel, members' views on the layout and tree protection are requested. Can the layout be supported in its current form? Well, actually, that's very much linked to what I've just said. Are we saying the layout can be supported in its current form, or that we would prefer it to be reconsidered?
Reconsidered, Chair.
Reconsidered, Chair.
Okay, any departures from that? Okay, so we would like further consideration to be given to the layout.
Sorry, Chair.
Somebody's coming in, Kaylee.
Yeah, sorry,
Councillor Brooks.
No, I mean, I asked that question as to whether it could be reconfigured, and it was stated that it was in the M, like whatever the mth number is. So I mean, and there was quite a lot of discussion as to, I mean, from the planners and developers stating that they'd already considered different configurations, and other configurations wouldn't comply with highways, if that's correct.
Would you like to clarify that, please, representatives of the applicant? Is there anybody particularly?
Yes. I can, yeah.
Thank you, Roger.
What I was saying when I said M, just for clarification, is obviously when we start off with the site layout, we start off with without a revision to it, and we start from revision A, B, C, D, etc. So what I was saying is it wasn't a pedantic point, it was more a point that we're revision M as a way of demonstrating that there has been a lot of dialogue and a lot of to and fro with the layout. I don't think we're pulling up the drawbridge on going to a further letter in the alphabet. So we will go away and look at what, because I think we do need to just have a look at T6 in particular, and what we can do with the layout to help make sure that tree is secured. But we do also need to be mindful of things like the highway layout and what we've agreed there, and other aspects in terms of distances between buildings, etc. And we would really want to avoid losing any more density than we have already. But we are happy to reconsider the layout. Thank
you very much indeed. And then if I draw your attention to bullet point 3, subject to more conclusions of the biodiversity metric calculations, members' views on the biodiversity offer are requested. Are members content with the proposals that the application in respect of the biodiversity to be supported in its current form? Any comments on that one? Colin, your hand's up. Is this yours that you wanted to comment on?
No, I'm the next one.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that? I've got Councillor Ray.
I didn't mean to put my hand up, sorry, Chair.
So do we have no comments on this at all, or are we saying we are?
I'll briefly comment, Chair. In danger of over dominating the panel at this point, but the tree, the whips, basically the feathers that are proposed, in my view, won't do a whole lot in terms of increasing the biodiversity.
So as we've already said, we want to see some substantial replanting in that area to increase the biodiversity.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. And now, Colin, we've come to your point, which is other matters.
Yes, can I just touch on something that nobody's raised so far, and that's actually the design of the building. I appreciate the drawings are a bit small for us to look at, but if I'm honest with you, they look a little uninspired to me. And I do think that if the developers are going away to look at the layout, which they obviously are, could they also look at the design and try and make it a little bit more, or a little less mundane? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would the applicant's representatives like to comment on that?
I think we're showing a willingness to revisit certain aspects of the development, and particularly the environmental landscape related ones. I've not heard anything from anybody. I appreciate what the council is saying, but we have been through the design, again, coming back to revision numbers. We have met with the council's design officer previously and amended the scheme to satisfy those requirements. I don't share the view that it's a mundane design. I think Richard picked up at as part of his presentation about trying to bring in elements of the historic buildings, the public house on the land, as well as part of the design. So I'm not saying no, we won't at all, but I think it will be minor points rather than anything significant.
I think as well, you know, possibly you haven't given us quite enough information on that aspect. As Colin said, the drawings are quite small. So if we had a larger or more accurate understanding of what that design looked like, we might have been in a better position. I don't know whether you want to comment, Richard, on the discussions that you referred to in your presentation around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, Roger's right, and he's put it well, is that it has been in for a long time, and I think it reflects the fact it's not the easiest site to develop, but it's got an awful lot of positives as this development, in terms of providing, you know, social housing for supported vulnerable groups. It obviously reopens up the green space and creates an area that all the community can use, not just those on site, which currently is unsafe or unsatisfactory to use. It removes problems such as current situation we've got with a lot of fly tipping and antisocial behaviour, quad bikes, trespassing, bonfires, you name it. It's a problem for the applicant to maintain. So we've tried to work with the applicants, and yes, it has taken a while, but clearly, you know, they've been keen to listen to obviously design changes, and they've taken them on board. So I think design's progressed well. You know, I don't know if Andy Brooke, who's the architect, wants to say any more, whether he could produce some sort of finer detail or better scale drawings that would show, you know, the detail that I think is coming through. I mean, I personally, I think it reflects a lot of the history of the site and the, you know, the surrounding context, but, you know, whether Andy can elaborate any further on anything he could do additionally, I'll hand over to him.
Hello.
Hello, yes, we can hear you.
Hello there. Yeah, well, regarding the design, what I would say is that the scheme was designed to be in reconstituted stone up to about a week and a half ago, when it was asked if we could change it to a red brick. We'd always felt that in reconstituted stone as a standalone scheme, it would stand out, and it stand out as something of maybe a little bit more quality. So it was requested, and we very, very, very quickly changed it to a red brick scheme to try and hit it for this meeting. We will have a look and see what we can do in terms of design and something that might lift it slightly. But I think in general terms with Roger, I don't think it's that dull. But you know, we will obviously look at it as we've taken on board comments all the way through this process.
Yeah, what I would like to suggest is, have you produced any CGIs yet?
We have got CGIs of it, of the scheme, yeah.
I mean, I would be happy to meet with
Not in
Richard.
brick, yeah, sorry, they're not in brick, they're still the old stone ones. So, but we will.
Oh, that's why we haven't seen them. I understand.
Correct, yeah, because
Okay.
the request came through maybe a week ago to change it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, if panel members are happy, I'm willing to have a chair's brief around that with the material with Richard in between meetings to see where we are with that, to see what's going to come and be put in front of you again. If you're happy with that, panel. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So have you got enough of a steer, Richard, from us on these points?
Chair, can I?
I'm sorry, Colin. Your hand's up again.
I'm sorry to labour this point, Chair. Well, no, I'm not sorry to labour this point, because actually I think integral within any application is good design, isn't it?
Yes.
And being told that last week it was reconstituted stone and this week it's red brick does explain a lot, particularly in relation to some of these, some of the block units or the bungalow sections. I know when you were talking about saying how it reflects the original building on site, I had a look at the photograph you kindly sent us of the original building. And if you look at that, and if members have got it in front of them, there's a lot of articulated detail in that particular building. And now I'm not expecting you to recreate the pub, but I do look at some of these drawings, and there's a huge area of red brick on a lot of them, which is broken up by what looks like a course of alternate brickwork. And I have to say to you, Chair, that if it comes back like this, then I will be creating more of an issue in relation to it when it comes back, because I think this position statement, for want of a better word, or pre-app, or what are we calling it, is where we have to say to developers, yes, we're quite happy with the principle of development, but we're talking about detail and we're talking about good quality design. Yeah. And at the moment, I don't think this is a good quality design. There's vast areas of roofscape unbroken by anything, huge red brick walls. You know, the old pub had character. This ought to have character too.
Yeah, I mean, just from personal experience, Councillor Heselwood and myself do have a supported living scheme in our ward, and as Richard knows, we're looking at the moment at the development of a second one in a different part of the ward. And as ward councillors, we have had very, very close discussions with Richard and others around what is going to be in our ward. We welcome the scheme with open arms. We have had a lot of intricate discussion about design, about layout, about security, about material for boundaries, etc. And I would expect the ward members to be having that detailed discussion. So I'm assuming, Richard, that Armley ward members will be involved at that level before this application returns to us.
Yes, we can certainly update them. You know, they've been involved throughout, and obviously happy to have another discussion with them as we go forward with the design. That's not a problem, Chair.
The other observation, while we're still at this position statement, with regard to our personal experience of having developments like this in the ward, is that the one that is currently now fully occupied and has been there for some time, we clearly know the residents in there. They are our ward residents, and from time to time, or actually quite often, they call upon us for the normal sorts of things that residents call upon their local councillors for, and we have reason to go there to speak to them and have meetings with them about things on an individual basis. And actually, as far as I'm aware, Jude Court doesn't have either a social area or a separate room where residents could meet us out of their homes. So whenever I've been there to meet a resident, I have gone into their flat. And frankly, I have on occasion felt it's been a bit of an intrusion. So I would, as a councillor, welcome the kind of space where I could meet with a resident or residents outside their actual home boundary, because I think residents with those kind of needs need very specific adaptations to their interiors, and I just feel it can be a bit intrusive for the only place to see them to be in their home. So I would advocate additional space like that personally. Okay, I think we've probably gone as far as we can with that discussion, and I thank you all for your contributions. I will organise, Richard, if you wouldn't mind doing the logistics for me, a further briefing when we're in a position to look in more detail at the design. And I would also be happy to join ward members if they were having a meeting in a similar way that Bramley ward members have met. Just simply to listen and take note of what they're saying, so I can report it back.
Yeah, that's fine, Chair. We can organise that. Yeah.
Okay. So does anyone wish to make any further comments or clarify anything further? David, I did notice, I'm sorry, you've had your hand up for some time and I've not brought you in. Please go ahead.
No, it's okay, Chair. I was only going to raise a point that Councillor Finnegan had made just on point 4, just so it wasn't lost, about wanting specifics on EN1 and EN2 and how the scheme meets that. And we'll make sure that comes back to members when it's reported for a decision.
Thank you very much. Do you want to sum up and reflect the debate, David, at this point?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah. So in terms of if I just go through the questions, and the first question related to the landscape plan and whether that's appropriate, and the second question, the two are interlinked really. Members' views on the layout and tree protection are requested. So members have expressed some concern in respect to the loss of trees, and would like the consideration being given to the reconfiguration of the layout to help protect trees. The trees that have been highlighted in discussion were particularly T6, but also T3. In terms of the public open space, the use of heavy standard trees, we also did hear the comments from Landscape Officer Seamus that the officer's position is that there's a lot of work to be done on that, the design of that open space in any event. So we will take those matters away. In terms of question 3, which deals with the biodiversity metric, we'll continue with the positive work on that, but we'll look to improve the biodiversity provision on site through the additional landscaping, and we will report back to members on that. And that may involve some improvements through the use of heavy standard trees through the public open space. In terms of the design, we've noted Councillor Campbell's comments and very helpful, the detailed comments about the breaking up the massing, more architectural detail, and we will try and produce better images in liaison with the applicant CGIs, more information in terms of the detail of the design, but prior to it coming back to plans panel, there'll be discussions with ward members and with yourself, Chair, on those issues. And then notes I've got. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Everybody content with that? Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our business today. Thank you very much for your contributions and for your presence. Very much appreciated. The next meeting is on the 4th of March, and I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.